Ba-ding. Ba-ding. Diddly-diddly-diddly-diddly. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-da-da-da-dee. Da-dee. Come on. Come on, chat. Get into position. Come on, chat. You can do it. Yay! You're just roughly in the place I want you to be. Cute. Just. Why is it? If given half a chance, you'll go weird. Hello everyone, how are we doing? Now today is, if I'm not mistaken, Thursday the 15th. So that means I need to do that. And find the 5. Put the 1 on the 1 on this side, so I know where all the 1s are. Alright, it's Thursday the 15th of July, and it is, if I'm not mistaken, Patron 28. Now, let's see. You're a bit on the low side, aren't you? Yes, you are. So that's a bit better. And if I tag you around that just a little bit. Sorry about this. The camera got knocked earlier by a rampaging fluffy poodle. And I thought I had it right, but then I flick it on and go, oh no, that's not quite right. Right then, how are we all doing? Let's see. Hello Peter Dawson, hello Dylan Lalare, hello Kilo 19, hello Derp Squad, hello Greg Sowski, hello Timu Luca, hello DGV40, hello RAF, hello, let's see, Matthias Slavic, hello Calvin Gazbo, and Rick Vasava, hello Bart Foster, hello. Hello everyone. So, fun times going on today. Been a nice busy day. But this is the good point. This point is good. This week is a bit of an Age of Sail themed week, as let's be honest, we have Robert Calder and he is coming out. But the trouble is, so far I've uploaded videos and it's been kind of like the Bilge Pumps podcast. Every time I've uploaded it, there's been something come back going, are you sure? The Bilge Pumps podcast was more of a issue with the way it had been coded, which should now be fixed, and hopefully it goes live tomorrow morning while we're recording next week's one. And the video, in this case the recorded video, it didn't like some of the pictures I'd used, because... And this actually caused me to have to rejig a lot of the pictures for this one, because it just didn't like those pictures. It said that I didn't have permission to use them. So, and I do think I have permission to use them, but I don't get to win the argument with YouTube. I just basically went, right then, fine, I will go for my normal Wikipedia pictures, which will be fine. Let's see. Hello, Paul from Chicago. Samuel Hahn, hello. Aegis Flow, hello. Admiral Parent, Santissimo Trinidad, a viable military vessel or more of a political statement? Once you're into capital ships, they're always a bit of a political statement. Doesn't matter which age you're in, they're always a bit of a political statement. And let's be honest, the whole point of building the biggest is because you can't build the most. So that's what they're doing. They're going... We can't build as many as other people are, so we have to build the biggest. Hello, have you Evan? How was your research, Dr. Clark? It was fun. Jersey was a nice place to go for a research trip. There were some tweets. We had a fair amount of fun there. It was a good stuff to do. Good stuff to research. Considering the 64-gun Agamemnon took her, I think the Spanish had other issues. Well, let's be honest. The 64-gun Agamemnon is the 64-gun Agamemnon. There are a few ships which, frankly, due to their names and history, should never be treated as a mere product of their fact sheet capabilities. Hello, IKB4472. Hello, M35 Benvitz. I don't know if everyone else at work will like this, but they will hear it anyway. Yeah, they will. They will. Let's be honest, I'm loud enough, they will hear me. Good evening. What kind of Ninja Live is that? Wasn't listed to set a 30-minute reminder. Honestly, I thought I'd set it up earlier in the week and I hadn't. Oops. Sorry. Dylan Lair, did you visit the war tunnels or was it more the coastal areas you had a gander at? We did wander through some of the war tunnels. Not enough of the war tunnels for our interest, for our desires though. We have plans on some of the unopened war tunnels. Hello, Centurion X. Right then. So, we're doing frigates. And the joy about frigates is that they are special at any point. They really are. Royal Navy frigates are especially associated, but the thing is, once you get into the frigates of the Royal Navy, once you get into the frigates of the world, you start to find it's a lot more complicated than perhaps the standard story. And that's why I was really kind of interested in doing this topic, because it allows me to make the point which is often forgotten, which is that there is nothing new under the sun when it comes to concepts of war. There never is. In fact, honestly, the first thing you're going to learn when we go through this is that the origin of the frigate itself is disputed. Hello, Shimmy. There are two main options. There is a Mediterranean, Italian Fragata, a light 15th century galley, or Dutch Fragata, or Spanish, Catalan, Portuguese, Sicilian Fragata, or French Frigate. They all appear roughly some point in the 15th century. The dispute is over what they mean first, and the real problem you have is that for a while it's more about the ship's style than what the ship is. I.e., it's more a case of you're building a ship for speed and maneuverability than it necessarily is a sail ship or a galley ship. And this is where I think the issue comes in, because I have a feeling at this point frigate means more I'm building what type of warfare I'm building a ship for. Am I building a ship for fighting in the line of battle? Am I building a ship for guerre de course, i.e. economic warfare? If I'm doing that, then the odds are I'm building a frigate. So it becomes a frigate of various types. And I think there is a belief that the phrase frigate means building long and low is a French term which comes after the invention of the frigate. My personal belief, and I say this based on being a historian who deals with a lot of history of ship naming and ship style naming, that whilst that phrase might not have been noted down until after the frigates were built and they started going, I have a feeling there was a phrase meaning long, low, or fast and small around frigate for a while before that. I think probably in the Mediterranean area, because that's the trade hub. I'm not sure whether it comes from the Dutch, because again, the Dutch are building small light ships from the very beginning. For some reason, they need to. I can't think why, looking at their geography. But also, the thing is, the Italians have about a dozen phraseologies around building light frigates. They really do. They change phraseology around light frigates as often as they change hairstyles or toppings on their pizza. I know, sorry. Joke. If you're offended, it's not meant to, but you know. They do. They just do. They change it a lot. You also have the problem that, and this is going to sound strange, they go straight into war. And nothing pushes things on as quicker than the effect of war. And there is an 80 years war going on from 1568 to 1648 for starters. There are lots of different interesting conflicts going on. This means that there are lots of opportunities for development and lots of opportunities for phraseology. And before anyone starts going, but you said this about Royal Navy frigates and you're starting off with the origin of the frigates. And I haven't checked the questions yet because I have my notes up in front of them, but I'll be flicking to the questions in a second. You cannot understand the Royal Navy frigates, really, if you don't have an idea of where it comes from. And I would honestly say, actually, and this is going to get me into trouble, one of the best sections I've seen on the etymology of the term frigate is actually in Wikipedia, but I would have to say it's one of the most balanced, because it's probably had lots of different people playing around with it or writing, or whoever has written on the Wikipedia article has actually gone for a very unbiased approach, because every single book, of course, has every particular historian's particular phraseology. It's like if I wrote a book about the history of frigates and frigate warfare and Gurda course and all those things, I would probably start off with my belief that the term comes from they're building something small and fast, low and long and low. That's a frigate. Hello, Supercharged 350. Hello. Guys, on the 14th of July, 1456, the Ottoman blockade has been broken on the Danube during the siege of Belgrade. Fun. Shumi, good evening all. May the Blackburn be with you all. Ooh, fun times. Off license, hello. Hello, Alexander. Were frigates originally considered as cheap and, if necessary, disposable warships? Not really, because no one really considered anything a cheap and disposable warship at this point. If you made a ship out of... basically, any ship you made out of softwood or unseasoned wood was cheaper and was short-term. It wasn't going to last. Any ship you're making out of seasoned hardwood is going to last for a long, long time. So warships of no type are considered cheap and disposable in this period. They could be in service for 100 years, even frigates. And some of them are in service for a disturbingly long time. Even though there must be noted that they do have some very extensive rebuilds in those periods. So, you know, it's 100 years, wink wink. Afternoon, Jeff Ealer. Thank you. Yeah, so frigate bird is named after the ship, not ship after the bird. That certainly seems to be the possibility. I'm not getting into that one, but it does seem to be the possibility that the frigate bird is named after the ship rather than the ship after the bird. And I have to admit that was one of the first things I looked into and went, oh, really? JV, look, what kind of ship did frigate duties before frigates? Pinnaces, Nina and the Pinta? Okay, so before frigates were along, there were galleys, but also you have to remember the main warships weren't that massive. You see, it's only when the ships of the line start to grow bigger that you start to need smaller warships. If we consider it like the modern warfare, whenever I talk about destroyers and their growth, destroyers start from torpedo boats, really. They get to torpedo boat destroyers, and then they grow into destroyers. And then, as time goes in, the Royal Navy needs to bring in back first sloops, then corvettes, then frigates, between destroyers and torpedo boats to fill in that small ship gap. Because you always need smaller ships. But you tend to, the ships you're building, in peacetime especially, tend to grow in size because you want to do more with them. You're trying to get a more bang for your buck. You're trying to get more value for money. Tends to come from having a larger ship because operating costs, you only have one captain, i.e. you have far less expensive personnel in a bigger ship than you do in the same tonnage of smaller ships. We need more of those personnel, and they're expensive and difficult to train. They take time and investment. So it tends to be smaller ships come out... hence these ships come about when you've grown your bigger ships past the point at which they can do. That's also one of the reasons why it's kind of interesting about the frigates. There's also the fact that for quite a long time you can have a frigate-built ship of the line. Okay? Ships can be built, and we'll be getting into this because, of course, then there's the whole great frigates, which we'll be talking about, and it just gets more and more fun as you go through it. And there's a whole debate over whether great frigates are third-rate or fourth-rate ships of the line. We're going fourth, okay? We're going fourth. They're 60 guns. They're fourth. Because we get internal screaming. I know, as an academic, there is. I really don't want to recommend it, but I have to. I was being honest. Don't cite it, and it does have. It does actually use a sword. It's referencing James Henderson's Frigates, Sloops, and Brigs, published 2005 by Pen and Sword. So that's the source it's got, and I've got that book as well somewhere, which I did use. But as I said, the write up in the wiki was slightly better. Off license. So were these early frigates used like the more commonly known frigates, i.e., trade protection, scouting, convoy, blockade? Mostly, but again, we'll be getting into this, but it gets quite confusing after a while. Mainly because the Dutch at one point are building some very large frigates of about 1,600 tons. No. Yeah. No. No, not that. From about 1,600, looking at my notes. They were building larger ones of about 500 to 600 tons. But by the end of the 80 Years' War, the Dutch were actually focusing on 40-gun ships carrying about 300 tons, weighing about 300 tons. And the trouble is converting them from burthen to the actual weight. It's fun, but the point is, frigates, especially the earlier ships, it's more describing their style of construction than necessary ship. You might well build a smaller frigate for girder course work, like we've been talking about the traditional frigate work. but you also could build a ship of the line, or what we consider a ship of the line, frigate style, i.e. long and designed to be as fast as possible, because you decided you want a fast, big ship. The interesting thing is it's the frigate-built ships which really do lead to the line of battle. So it's the frigates which give us the ships of the line, which is where they come from, because they're the ones which are longer, thinner hulled, lower, concentrating on the gun battery, and therefore they lead to the broadside and the broadside doctrine, which leads to what we'll be talking about. But really, this starts off with is the Battle of the Downs. It's where this comes of age. Now, the Battle of the Downs is an interesting battle. It's one of those battles where, frankly, it's weird going in and it's weird coming out. It takes place on 21st of October, 1639. And it's the Spanish under Admiral Antonio de Oquendo, who is against the force commanded by the then Lieutenant Admiral Martin Tromp. Now I've mentioned the commanders, without looking it up, anyone want to guess who wins? It's Tromp versus Oquendo. Anyone want to guess? Tromp or Oquendo? Guess who wins? Seneca Lira, how late am I? Not that late, and we're just answering the question of Tromp or Oquendo. Yeah, and Greg Salowski has got in first with Tromp. Yes, it was. Tromp won. The Spanish had the Dutch claimed the Spanish had 53 warships. The Spanish claimed they had 38. The Dutch turned up with 95 warships. The Spanish lost between 25 and 43, again depending on who you believe, and the Dutch lost between 1 and 100, 1 and 10. I mean, it's a really, really nasty battle, but it is quite a strange battle going in. As I said, and a strange battle coming out. The fact is, it's also kind of weird in that it takes place more or less off the coast of Britain rather than off the coast of Spain or Netherlands. Mainly because the Spanish are just coming out the channel and the Dutch decide to engage them. Because, okay, the Dutch over here, somehow, that Oquendo is making for an anchorage known as the Downs, which, as any of you know from Age of Sail and various other things, is between Dover and Deal. It's a nice, safe place. And the theory was they could anchor there under the protection of English neutrality. Now you're going to learn a lesson here. In that, I don't want anyone to think, but neutrality rarely ever works. Unless that nation is heavily armed and prepared to protect the neutrality, it rarely offers you any defence. We'll be getting into that later with a Swedish frigate. And in kind of a reverse of the Battle of the Armada, the Dutch are coming at the English coast with some fire ships. The problem for the Spanish, more than anything, is that they just can't outrun the Dutch. They can't really outmaneuver the Dutch, And whilst on paper they can outfight the Dutch because they're supposed to be they're massive and they have all the strength and all the firepower, the reality is the Dutch can keep circling them and destroying them. And the Dutch at several times form variations on a sailing line, a battle almost, with the broadsides. Now, again, there aren't many ships in this fleet which we might call a frigate. Let's consider the Netherlands fleet. They have the Amelia, 57 guns. The Frederick Hendrik, 36 guns. Tolshash Tain, 32 guns. Salamander, 40 guns. Goes on. You have lots and lots of ships which are frigate gunnage for later. Certainly frigate gunnage for later. But for the period we're talking about, are quite big ships. They are pretty much the heavy ships of the fleet. The Spanish ships, well, they have a few 60-gun ships, and then they have all sorts of other weird things along for life. It's basically a fun time for the Spanish Navy. And the Battle of the Downs is, when it comes about, the Spanish keep trying to form their formations, they're trying to maintain their doctrines, and the trouble is the ships they're now facing are far better adapted to A, firing and manoeuvring under the sea, and B, the speed of manoeuvres, and the weight of guns that they can carry. And that, again, the Spanish ships, the guns, are trying for uniformity, are trying for the sort of standardization which other navies are pushing for at this point, but the Dutch are actually there. And in many ways, their guns, because they're mounted lower down, they can carry heavier guns. This is the other advantage of the frigate design. If you've got your guns mounted higher in the hull, you have to have smaller guns, because otherwise the weight's too much and your ship goes clunk. So you need to, if you have it lower in the hull, lower center of gravity, you can actually carry heavier guns. Helpful. Now, Fab, how are they specified? I.e., here's some money, 40 guns, or was it, here are some drawings and measurements? Okay, so honestly, probably better for me to get into the next slide to discuss this one. The design. So you would approach your naval architect, your constructor, and you would say, I want a ship built with X number of guns, normally. If you were the Royal Navy, you'd say one of our rated patterns at a certain point in history. If you're the French, you'd say something similar, but tends to be very scientific. And you'd go, I want it built to a fast frigate hull. Or I'd want it built to a frigate hull, because I want to emphasize maneuverability and speed. And that's the point. The point about the frigate hull really is the idea that there's no point having firepower that you cannot use. I.e., there is no point being the most powerful warship on Earth if you're just going to be able to lumber along in a straight line and everyone else can ignore you because they can just get out your way if you can actually fire at them, and they can choose when and where they're going to fire at you from. There just isn't any point. The Dutch got word via their frigates. I think the Dutch got word by English fishermen, I have this feeling. Looking at it, they do seem to be... Let's put it this way, they seem to be getting regular updates of where the Spanish are. And considering the Spanish are trying to hug the English side of the English Channel, I have a feeling there might have been some sympathetic Protestants assisting them. Derp Squad, I know that's you're attempting to be joke, but actually, I know that's a attempt. That's a good joke, but also, I'm from Epsom, the Downs where the Derby are. Um, there's a lot of places called the Downs. Basically, I think it means windy place. In my experience from going over them, I never looked up the etymology of that particular name, but it does seem to be everywhere that's called the Downs tends to be windy. There's a whole medical debate going on now in the chat. Um, don't worry, Stafford. This only got advertised about a couple minutes before it went live. Jeff Biller, when did frigates start having an empty deck below their gun deck but above the hold? That's actually quite a sort of later adoption. And honestly, the most of that is about sea keeping. So when you start to go right, then I want to raise the top. I want to raise the gun deck a bit higher for water because we're operating in the North Atlantic. But so you're putting in a strength deck and tends to be a spar, especially with spar deck frigates is the case. And you put in the hold underneath, and you're sort of going, well, that's a massive space for the hold. So put in another deck, and then that gives you space for crew, space for things. So it's more a case of subdividing the extended hold into into a space than it is a case of raising the gun deck up. But it doesn't. If it's better for center of gravity reasons, lower the guns, but the gun ports below, put the gun bolts below the waterline. That's the trouble. It's always balancing sea keeping and gravity because both will have an effect on your sea keeping. If you have your gun ports too low, water's coming in them. That'll sink you. If you have your guns too high and the weight too high on the ship, then you trying to maneuver will cause you to go like that as well. So it's a very careful balance. And one of the interesting things is that the French pursue a very scientific, mathematically focused approach to shipbuilding, and they're always wrestling with us. The British, now I want to be careful about this because there is a perception sometimes, because the French write all these theoretical papers and talk about all the mathematical revelations in their work, that the French are far more scientific than the British, and the British are just going, oh, that'll do. The British are far more experience-led. The British build a greater variety of designs. So the French tend to come up with a design, then repeat it ad infinitum, which is why they tend to produce quite large classes. Whereas the British tend to build a smaller class, look at what they did right, think about how they changed that, and then do another smaller class, and then do another smaller class. So the British are doing a lot of evolution learning. And the British also get to look at the French ships quite often and go, we'll be going over that zone. And sometimes they copy the French ships and then they don't like them. Because they think that would be a good idea. They copy them, they get them in the service and they go, ooh, we don't like this. It's a bit too finicky for us. One of the big problems is that the British complaints that come back on the French designed ships tends to be, this is a very good ship on paper. The practicalities, though, when it's covered in barnacles or when it's got an issue or this, that, no, it soon goes bad. Whereas the British ships, which are built slightly more, well, A, slightly more Rubenesque and B, slightly more rugged, tend to be better for longer range work and further away from home. Let's go. Downs was an area anyone could go to graze their animals. Kind of public meadow. The Bristol one still has to be grazed once every 10 years to maintain the status of downs. Cool for them. I think the Epsom ones get by with the amount of horses which go over them every day. Steph Thompson, re-guns are not using them. Reminds me of trying to chase down an Arizona in my New Mexico last night. Why were you trying to chase down an Arizona in New Mexico? Off topic for this one. We'll discuss that later on Discord. Off topic. Santa Canera, good building master feels it if it's a good ship. A good naval constructor will know if it's a good ship or not. And they will be very, very blunt about whether it'll work or not. And the French ships are free, that does help. That does make the RN slightly happy with them. Slightly, not much happier, but slightly happier with them. Now, here's the frigate role. This is the Portuguese and the Spanish space fleets, or spaceship fleets. They could be carrying silver, gold, spices. Whatever they were carrying, they were bringing home a lot of it. And here is the thing. Frigates are for economic warfare. They might be carrying out a blockade. They might be... They might be carrying out actual economic warfare on the sea, i.e., basically piracy. But we don't call it piracy, because that's not nice. But pretty much the point of a frigate is it's got to be heavily enough armed it can do the fighting of economic warfare, but fast enough and long-legged enough to be able to hunt down its prey. Which also makes it rather later on perfect for reconnaissance and perfect for other duties. So I would say this about the role of the frigate. Frigate as it comes in is a slightly longer hull, lower hull, a narrower hull in some respects. And it is designed for speed and range and maneuverability. Basically, it's a better gun platform. But as time goes on, they work out that this can be useful for other things. They've built this better gun platform. They were thinking more about it in terms of fighting in the immediate area. And then they work out, well, hang on, we can use this for this. So, frigate is something where it is attributes which start to define a role, start to make a role possible. And that's why frigates are called frigates rather than cruisers. Because frigates tend to start to go a-cruising, which is the economic warfare and the role we traditionally associate with them thanks to the movies and all the fiction books and quite a lot of the history books. We associate the cruising role with them, but there's a reason they're called frigates rather than cruisers, because the frigate actually precedes and predates the role that they adopt. Because, honestly, the role's been around slightly before then. There have been ships pre the frigate, which have gone, galleons have gone a-cruising. They have. Not always particularly well, but there have been a fair number of English ones gone a-cruising. Take care, Stafford. That's good. I think with Porton Down, I think there's a difference when the military want to build on it in wartime. I seem to remember Porton Down is the exception of a World War exception, and now it uses the Downs protection to help protect it. Seneca, the Royal Navy hated piracy, they hated competition. To be fair, the Royal Navy got rid of piracy by being the competition. That was their thing. That was their far more effective method of getting rid of piracy. That and bribing pirates to become various naval officers. Jabilla, were frigates to some extent scaled up pinnaces? Not really. Because what happens more is they're changing galleons. They call them frigate-built galleons and frigate-built galleys and frigate-built this. So it's more a case of it's something which is a form of construction which evolves into an actual ship and class, rather than you don't get frigate-built pinnaces. Pinnaces are already pinnaces. In some ways, I'm sure they're taking an idea from the pinnace, but it's basically, that's quite a fast manoeuvrable design. Can we scale it up? Not really. It's more a case of, that's quite a fast manoeuvrable design. We'd like to make our ships, our big ships, faster and more manoeuvrable, wouldn't we? Yes. Let's borrow some ideas from it. But, as I said, it's frigating. Hello, Michael Patton. Off license. So at this stage, frigates, the cruiser role, had to be strong enough to take armed merchantmen. And they had to be strong enough to take warships as well. A pinnace is a much smaller ship. That's good. As M35 Bender says, when it's lowly individuals such as us do it, it's illegal. When it's done by the state, it's all a bit Judge Dredd. Yeah, basically. There is a difference. There is the whole point about the state and governments and all these things is they are. Whenever someone says, why do governments not like protection rackets and private security firms? Well, the answer is it's because the governments do not like anyone muscling in on their deal. That's why private security firms are as regulated as they are, and that's why protection rackets are as not persecuted because they shouldn't be there, but as are such a priority with the various police forces. I always thought pinnace was a type of ship's boat. It's often used as a ship's boat, but it's often one of the largest of the ship's boats, and if not the largest, especially, and it's before you get sort of the motor cutter, etc. And it's usually a sailing ship in its own right, in that it can sort of sail some distances on its own. Is it right? The pensioning off of pirates was a surprisingly successful idea. Yes. Always surprisingly successful. Pay someone not to be a pirate. They get the money, but none of the risk. I can't think why that'd be successful. I know. Broadly speaking, the thing about frigates, the thing that gives them the role, the cruising role, is globalization. That's going to shock a few people. Yes, globalization. Before globalization happens, as we call it in modern era, look at this. This is a global supply chain. This is a global movement of goods. This is an economic highway that spans the globe. And this is those nations' weaknesses. Because you ask them where they are, where they have got strong navies. They're all back in Europe. Where have they got their economic center of mass? Well, if you're Spain, arguably their economic center of mass is Havana. Look at that. Everything goes through Havana. If you're Portugal, well, their economic center of mass, if you look at the various routes of trade, that's Goa. Although they've got a fair amount going on down in Brazil. and the Azores and Lisbon. But that's all quite close next to your military centres of mass. Jeff Ehlert, so eventually frigates grow large enough to supplant 50 gunships, liners, long-range cruisers and escorts. We'll be getting into that in a second. We will be getting into that because, yeah, there is a lot of fun coming up. We always associate frigates with small ships. Well, yeah, that's not quite true. Again, this is something we'll be getting into. Strub, sorry, just joined if you ask this, but how do schooners fit in? They're even smaller. Strub, also, how long could a frigate cruise before needing to resupply? It would depend on their size of crew, the size of the amount of food they were carrying, and mostly their freshwater supplies. But honestly, most of them could do a couple of months, if not longer. Remember, unlike a modern ship, the hull is not taken up with a surfeit of space for engines and fuel. There's still a lot of stores which need to be carried, but remember there's no fuel and there's no engines down there. So the hull is a fairly blank canvas you can fill with everything you need, which means it can be far more densely packed in some respects. So, okay, Jeff Beeler, you just said, so eventually frigates grow large enough to supplant 50 gunships, liners, long-range cruisers and escorts. Managed to do 260-gun frigates. Great frigates. Roughly 60 guns. They are HMS Newcastle of 1653. And HMS Fairfax. Now, Newcastle is built in 1653, well, launched in 1653 by, as originally as a 44-gun, fourth-rate frigate of the English Navy, originally called of the Commonwealth of England Navy, i.e., built by Parliament. By 1677, she'll be carrying 54 guns. So, yeah. She will be part of Admiral Blake's attack on Santa Cruz de Tenerife in 1665. In 1657. In 1665, she fought at the Battle of Lowestoft. In 1674, she'd capture the Wapen van Rotterdam in the Battle of Ronesvo. And she was commanded by George Churchill during the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And she would stay in service until she's wrecked in 1703. Otherwise, she'd probably be in service for longer. So yeah, that's a frigate. You see, the point I'm making, Jeff, is that actually you always do have a heavy class of frigate. And when you're reading some descriptions of the great frigates, yes, they can form up in the line of battle, if that's required. But also they're fast enough. And basically the phraseology comes down to something very interesting. They are fast enough to outrun anything they can't outfight. And they have enough weaponry to outfight anything they can't outrun. Now, where have we all heard that phraseology before? Where is that phraseology most commonly applied? Where, and we're asking, When something is fast enough to outrun anything it can't outfight, and strong enough to outfight anything it can't outrun. Greg Starsky again. Yep. Battle cruisers. This is the point I really love about giving discussions about frigates. You can talk about the globalization. You can also talk about the fact that the idea of the battle cruiser is nothing new when it comes into existence. So people go, this is a revolutionary concept that Jackie Fisher comes up with. It's amazing. It's world-beating. It's not new. It's not new at all. It's been around for a long, long time. 1650s, and she's not even the earliest one. Basically, fast enough to outrun anything she can't outfight, tough enough to outfight anything she can't outrun, and does it for 50 years very successfully. Thank you very much. So, you know, that's a good value for money, that ship. She would have a crew normally of about, well, let's see, of about 500, I think, because she'd require 6 per gun plus a few 100 or so over that, and yeah, about 500 normally. Iskandar Tarib. Were there ever schooner frigates? Schooners did get quite large later on. There were later on, but that's very much end of age of sail. Couple of months with or without fresh water refill. Their fresh water they would keep in special casks, and that could last a while. We'll get on to the USS Constitution later, tis Rod's fault. Carl Henshaw, a cigar, a drink, and something. Thank you. Hello, Carl. John Emmett. How common were 44-gun frigates in the Royal Navy during the 1770s? I saw a partial reconstruction of one when I visited Yorktown's visitor centres. A lot. There were a fairly large number of them. Strub, HMS Warrior was a frigate. Yes, she was an ironclad frigate. By the way, quite a lot of people got in with the battle cruiser eventually. Jay, the Happy Wyvern. Did the British have an admiral in charge of frigates as bad as Beatty? No, we'll be getting into some of the admirals in charge of frigates later. Shumi, so a battle cruiser is just a scaled-up frigate. Potentially. And Emmon, so USS Constitution is a battle cruiser. Potentially, you could classify that as yes. As I'm said, basically, it's the same concept. It's nothing new. What I'm saying is the concept is nothing new. Fisher calling them a battle cruiser, that's nothing new. He could have also called them a frigate. That's the point. So imagine that, if that had been what had changed. If instead of calling them battle cruisers, Fisher had called them frigates. Imagine the difference in history. The world we'd be in. Also, imagine what they'd had to pick for World War II for what they call frigates in World War II. Imagine what other name they'd have come from. We could be today talking about the Type 26 brig. Yeah. Could be a brigantine or the Type 26 Swan. There's options. Student Aviator. HMS Warrior was not a frigate by role and purpose. It was a heavy ship of the line. Because it was a single gun deck ship, it was technically a frigate. Exactly. But also, it was supposed to be able to cruise. That's the thing. It was supposed to be able to use in a cruiser role. In the role of a cruising vessel. So, technically, yes, it does fulfill a frigate, but the fact is, they're all grouped together and become ships of the line. Also, you get the fact that Beatty becomes known as a frigate admiral rather than a battleship admiral. And what I will say is that there is, if you have a JSTOR account, I'm going to have a link available for you, and I'm going to put it down below for anyone who's interested in more reading about the Navy and the Commonwealth. There is a great article published actually in 1896. And I'll just put that down there, and hopefully you like it. But no, it's an interesting time, and HMS Newcastle is a pretty cool ship. There are a few portraits of her going around. In fact, there are two which are really, really gorgeous. This is one of them I've got on display here. There's another one available as well. Both can be found on the Wikipedia of her, and they're both by William van der Velde, and a really, really good painter. Has done some really, really good sketches. Okay. Eamon, Carrack or Galleon could have been. Strub, did the navies add extra carronades to up the broadside weight? Some did. Some did. Adfab, what's the brig on the brig called? The open water. Carl Harmon, hello. Oh, it's a pleasure. I look forward to Pembrokeshire. Shumi, hate to say it, but a battlecruisers sound much scarier than a frigate. This might just be 100 years of battlecruiser bonus. It might be. Dylan Lafayette. So if say the battlecruiser did become the frigate, what would have the large light cruiser? What become the large light cruiser title? No. Perhaps they would have been called light frigates. Yeah, that becomes an interesting world then. It's kind of that. Is the word brig meaning prison used in the context of outside the US Navy? Yes, because occasionally brig hulks are used as prison ships. And that's where it comes from. Lots of people having way too much fun with brig. Alright. So, now I'm getting into, well, what was considered one of the best designs ever. The French built this frigate called the Médée. Now, she's a lovely ship. She is a 26-gun vessel, and she's built in 1740. Now, wait here. You're going to go, Alex, this is rather strange. You're talking about a ship, and you haven't got a picture of her on here. I have. By 1745, she's not only been captured by the Royal Navy, she's been sold by the Royal Navy to a privateer and renamed the Boscawen. Okay? she's actually captured by the 60-gun HMS Dreadnought, who had originally been launched in 1742, and is a 60-gun, fourth-rated ship of the line, considered a heavy frigate by the Royal Navy to an extent, in that she's considered, based on the 1733 adaptations of the 1719 proposals establishment. So, the Royal Navy rather liked the Mayday. She is a lovely design. She was very pretty. And she's often considered the first example of the classic sailing frigate. And you can see why, with her lines and her shape. She's square-rigged and carried all her main guns on a single continuous upper deck. The lower deck, carrying no guns now. Traditionally it had been called the gun deck, and it's now by this point called the berth deck. So the earlier discussion we were talking about how the guns raised up, and then they had a space between the gun deck and the hold. This is the point. The Mayday is the example of that. The Mayday is the example of that. And this actually allowed various points to be lowered by raising it up one deck, because you need less space on that berth deck now than you did when you had guns, because it's far easier for men to crouch around than it is for guns to. Now, the main point for this was that by doing this, it meant that when seas were so rough that two gun decks ships couldn't open their lower port and couldn't use their lower guns, a frigate could still fire its main armament. Its whole guns would still be firing. So it was very efficient. You didn't have a load of crew hanging there and going, we can't do much. However, as said, the Royal Navy captured many of these new frigates, including Mayday, very quickly. She is launched in 1741. She's captured in 1744. She's sold in 1745. There's a debate over what happens to her. And then in November 1745, she's wrecked off at St Ives in Cornwall when she's a privateer. She has a very, very short service life. Incredibly short. But the Royal Navy did like what they found. They did. And it was her speed, her shape, her size, which allowed the Royal Navy to change. This is usually categorized by Nicholas Roger, but it is certainly the RN had already been considering it, and basically them being able to go, look, here's a French one. We operated it. It was quite good. We have some ideas that enabled them to adapt their ships. And so the Royal Navy start building their own versions by 1747. Based on the Mayday, based on the Tigre, based on other frigates which have been captured. And these British frigates have 28 guns, an upper deck battery of 24 9-pounder guns, and 4 smaller guns carried on the quarterdeck. But very quickly they decide that's not enough firepower. And very quickly they become 32 36 gun vessels, usually armed with at least 26 12-pounder guns, and with 6 to 10 9-pounders carried on the quarterdeck and forecastle. That's right. William van der Velde was both the name of the father and son. Son didn't car, so I guess one was his. I think both of them are sketches for the Newcastle ones. So I think they're probably both the dad. Didn't there? Ah, yes, a 20,000-ton light frigate. That sounds our intuition of having many confusing class names. Through-deck cruisers, anyone? Through-deck cruisers. Was the Medi the basis for HMS Surprise? To an extent. To an extent. Seneca, did the French shipyards ever ask the RN what they wanted? Because their creators would end up in the RN. Creations would end up in the RN regardless. No, they didn't. Surprise was actually a captured French frigate. Yes, but she was based on this one as well. And you have to remember again, quite a lot of the ships, when they get converted into Royal Navy ships, do get changed into something more. They do get adapted. Quite a lot of the Royal Navy versions of the ships, it's enter service and it goes, yes, this is the French ship we have captured. And you look at it and you look at the French ship and you go, you look a little fatter. Why? And you find the British adapt them because the British don't like the French ships on the basis of their ability to store supplies and maintain a long blockade and long journeys, in the British opinion. So the British tend to adapt the ships when they get them. This is the prize, but it's adapted. How many British ships were captured by the French? We'll be getting into that at certain points. We will be getting into that. There are some ships which basically change their colours every year. So, the thing is, the British like that, but the British decide, again, they want heavier guns. So by 1778, they introduce, and HMS Trimcombe Lee is a good example of this, although she's a later design, a heavy frigate. Again, this is the RN seeking something which is fast enough to outrun anything it can't outfight, heavy enough to outfight anything it can't outrun. And these would be main battery of 28 or 26 18-pounder guns, with the remainder made up of 12-pounder and possibly 9-pounder guns. Usually 32 to 36 guns total. The French respond with their 18-pounder frigates in 1781, and it pretty much becomes the 18-pounder becomes the standard frigate of the Revolutionary Napoleonic Wars. The British end up churning out three main versions. What was called the economy version with 32 guns, the standard with 36 guns, and the elite with 38 guns. The fact is, the main reason you build the 32 guns is not because of economy. They could be built by smaller, less specialised shipbuilders. The moment you got to the weights and the requirements for a 38-gun ship, it was very much a restricted building list. So it's not so much economy in terms of cost, it's economy in terms of industry. They usually carry a lot of carronades and other guns on their quarterdecks, forecastles, and various other places. In fact, the Carron Iron Company, who are of course the ones who come up with the carronades, are the ones who really, really start to help out the frigates carry a heavier gun armament. Now, again, remember a carronade is a shorter range weapon than a cannon. So, whilst it's lighter, and so you can put a more powerful throw weight in total on your ship, you can't achieve the same range. So, a frigate captain would often have to decide whether they wanted a stronger, longer range armament, or whether they'd be happy for a reduced long range but a massively stronger short range armament. That was their debate. This meant that in the end, the typical 18-pounder frigate would be carrying, especially if it's the 38-gun version, would be carrying 28 18-pounder long-range guns, 14 each side, and 10 32-pounder carronades, 5 each side. Now, this means that they have a very significant throw weight, which is kind of useful. That's what they want. HMS Unicorn has been through various career changes over a lifetime. That's she put in there, but she's a Leader class, and that's the same class as Trimcomley and as many other frigates. The Leader class were a pretty critical class for the Royal Navy. Their average was up. They would normally carry 28 18-pounder guns. On the forecastle, 2 9-pounder guns and 2 32-pounder carronades. And on the quarterdeck, 8 9-pounder guns and 6 32-pounder carronades. So they would carry a total of 28. They would carry a total of 46 guns. Well, let's see, just check my maths here. So that's 8 plus 10, so that's 18, on to 28, 38, 46, yes, 46 guns. But they're technically classed as a 38-gun frigate. Mainly because they don't count the carronades. So she carries 46 guns, but they don't count the carronades, so she's counted as a 38-gun frigate. Her long-range throw weight is significant. And if we consider the Leader class, and this is standard for the Royal Navy at the time, they build HMS Leader, of course, but technically, after she's built, they rather like her. The Leader herself was based on the Hebe. The Hebe class have an interesting experience in that. So, Hebe is a French frigate, right? She is laid down in December 1781. She's launched in June 1782. She's completed in August 1782. She's captured by the Royal Navy in September 1782. I mean, literally, Hebe is pretty much built for the Royal Navy. Literally built for the Royal Navy. And when you consider that Proserpine, her sister, gets captured by the Royal Navy, becomes HMS Amelia. Sibyl becomes HMS Sibyl. She's captured by the Royal Navy. And there, of the class of 6, 3 end up in the Royal Navy. Anyway, they rather like Hebe. She's a nice ship. So she inspires the Leader class, which are what the Royal Navy built on them. And the Royal Navy churn out Pomone, HMS Shannon, the vessel which beat up Chesapeake. She's one of these ships. Leonidas, Britain, Tenedos, Lacendian, Lively, Surprise, HMS Surprise, the 1812 one. Secundus, Eurytus, Niger, Meander, Pactolus, Tiber, Araxes, Tanas. Diamond, Amphrite, Trincomalee, which has survived to present day, as I said. Fetus, Arofusa, Blanche, and Fisgard. And then Venus, Melopus, Minerva, Latona, Diana, Hebe, the Royal Navy reconstructing the ship they captured. Nereus, Hamadrid, Amazon, Aeolus, Fisbay, Cerberus, Circe, Clyde, Thames, Fox. Completed 1856 as a screw frigate. Unicorn, completed this day. Daedalus, which was completed in 1844 as a 19-gun 6-rate corvette. Proserpine, Mermaid, Mercury, Penelope, and Thalia. And they ordered 6 more, but they didn't complete them to that design. And then eventually they decided to complete them. They completed them to the Serengtan class of sailing frigate, which were 46-gun sailing frigates. The Royal Navy built those between 1824 and 1827. And the Serengpan have 28 18-pounders again. 40, and this time they're basically counting. They're 46-gun frigates, but they're pretty much exactly the same as the previous class. In fact, they carry more carronades, but they're now counting the carronades as part of their gun armament. So she's a 46-gun ship, but that's basically the same as the later class for 46-gun ships. Hello, Melanie, 1640. And I was going to talk about the Palace class, wasn't I? Because we were asking about them going back with the force. Okay. Now, the Palace class are constructed in 1808, and they are 40-gun frigates of the French Navy. They are built to serve in their wars. Now, Corona captured the Battle of Lisa on the 18th of March, on the 13th of March, 1811. She's been completed in 1808. So she managed to serve 3 years in the French Navy. They were again 28 18-pounders, 8 8-pounder long guns, 8 36-pounder carronades, or 12 18-pounder carronades. A lot of these ships get captured, but this is one of those classes which is really quite important because they get captured and they inspire a lot of development because they're a very interesting design. They're a very mathematically interesting design. But to be fair, the Royal Navy captures a lot of them. They really do. Although some of them were captured when they were basically Italian Navy or other navies because they were completed by the other navies. Discouragement, why not count carronades? Because they weren't able to doing the long range firing, which they thought was the critical thing. Seneca, how often were guns put on the main deck, so without a roof on the top? That's quite common, really. It is. Now, this is one of those battles which you're not going to have heard about much. But it's quite an important one. It's under the command of a guy called Commodore Graham Moore. And he has 4 frigates, and he's against a Spanish commander who has called José de Bosante, who also has 4 frigates. Now, under the terms of a convention which was going on at the time, Spain was paying 72 million francs annually to France until it declared war on Britain. This was basically the Spanish getting out of their alliance by funding the French war effort, so they didn't have to fight the British. The British, though, learnt about this because the British had a fairly effective intelligence network in Spain and in France, and they therefore calculated it was going to be very likely that Spain would declare war soon after their treasure ships got back, because, well, the treasure ships would allow them to, instead, once they were back safely, it would be, we've got a lot of money, we can either keep paying the French not to go to war, or now we've got the money here, we can go to war. Going to war will be cheaper. However, here is where the Spanish get into trouble, because they have a law which says the fleet can only land at Cadiz. And that they also knew the fleet's approximate time of departure and place of departure from South America. The British were fairly good navigators, they understood the world's oceans, they therefore knew pretty much where the squadron would be that where they wanted to intercept it. So, Bustamante sails from Montevideo on the 9th of August 1804 with 4 frigates. They are loaded to the gulls with gold and silver and every other valuable item you can possibly imagine. Admiral Cornwallis dispatches the then Captain Graham Moore in charge of the 44-gun Raze frigate HMS Indefatigable to intercept and detain the Spanish ships. Now, if you've just heard that, you'll worked out that there's something I'm going to be talking about later, which is kind of an interesting one. The plan was to detain them peacefully, if possible, but if not, then not. The ships he has with him are Lively, Medusa, and Amphion. And they were patrolling the approaches to Cadiz in a line abreast formation. They are basically watching out for the Spanish. On the 5th of October, the Spanish frigates are sighted off the coast of Portugal. At 7 a.m. that morning, they sight the 4 British frigates. Bustamante then decides, I'm going to fight these people, I'm going to go into a line of battle. However, his very manoeuvre means that the British get to windward of the Spaniards and actually get to within pistol shot range. Moore sends Lieutenant Ascot to the Spanish flagship Medea to explain his orders. Bustamante, let's be honest, no one ever thought he was not going to, refused to surrender, and at 10 a.m. Moore orders a shot be fired ahead of the bows of Medea. Immediately, the general exchange breaks out. Unfortunately for the Spanish, and to an extent for the British in terms of prize money, within 10 minutes the Mercedes magazine blows up, killing all but 40 of her 240 crew. And it's one of the largest explosions that's ever been seen by many of the people involved, because the whole ship goes whoomp. Within half an hour, the Santa Clara and the Medea had surrendered. Farmer breaks away and tries to flee, but unfortunately, she's followed, and by Medusa and then Lively, and they capture her a few hours later. They take the Spanish frigates first to Gibraltar and then later to Gosport. Now, here is the point, and here is the interesting thing. The 4 ships were carrying a total of $4.25 million Spanish dollars in silver and gold coin, as well as 150,000 gold ingots, 75 sacks of wool, nearly 1,700 bars of tin, nearly 600 pigs of copper, seal skins, oil, and in total. And this was, although this was not including, about 1.2 million in silver, half the copper and the quarter of the tin actually goes down the Mercedes. The remaining cargo and ships are assessed at a value of £900,000 at the time. Or 69 million apparently in 2019 money, but I'd reckon it's a lot more than that myself. However, because Britain was not technically at war with Spain, the Admiralty Court decides that under the terms of the Cruisers and Convoys Act of 1708, the ships captured at sea were technically droits of the Crown and became the property of their captors. But, as there was no technicality at war, the Admiralty Court rules that the free ships become droits of the Admiralty, and so all revenues from them revert to the Admiralty rather than to the ship's crews. Royal Navy worked out very quickly that this would not be a good thing to let go down. They might get pissed off sailing crews for their better frigates. So they decide to make an ex gratia payment of £160,000, of which the 4 captains received roughly £15,000 each, or equivalent to about a little over £1 million in 2019. Medea becomes HMS Infinia, later named HMS Impruse. Santa Clara becomes HMS Leoncida, and Farm becomes HMS Farmer. The Spanish declare war on Britain in December 1804. And, you know, it's fun. That's the joy of the convoy war. That's the joy of what the frigates get involved in. But you have to remember, the Royal Navy actually has this argument that legally, because they're not at war, they can't award the crews prize money. And a lot of the legal wrangling goes through the fact the Royal Navy still wants to pay those crews as much money as they can, but they can't be seen to be paying them prize money because it's not legal. So they come up with this extra payment, this ex gratia payment system. If they had been paid full prize money, well, its value assessed at the value of £900,000. The captains get 15 grand each out of the £160,000. Think about how much the captains would have got. Let's see, £160,000 into 900. It's about 5.5 times that, so they would have got probably £82,000, or the equivalent of nearly 5.5 million, 5.6 million in 2019 money. I could have made. Being a frigate captain was considered a very good posting. And it's not much surprise that quite a lot of admirals come from the frigate postings, because, honestly, a good officer on a frigate posting could set themselves up for life. And that's what a lot of them did. That's 24 plus that equals 50, equals 26. 01, 2. So I see that Dan has decided he wants to he wants the new emoticon emojis. And actually, I was going to announce at some point. Thank you to everyone who has joined the channel. Thank you to everyone who's a patron. You're all funding it, and very, very nice. And all the people who do super chats, it's all very good. I was going to say though that we were one person away before Dan joined the channel. One person away from another emoji being able to be added. So now I will have to go and add probably a frigate themed emoji because it's been added during this episode. Seneca, was there ever a name conflict where the RN captured a ship, then the French built another ship of the same name that also got captured, and the RN, what happened then? The Royal Navy renamed them. Seneca, was there ever a fight between two ships of the same name? I think there was. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I think it might have been one of the Indefatigables or something like that. I seem to remember it was I names. Jade the Happy Warren, what happened to the crews of the captured ships? That was a whole different political wrangle, and it was interesting. Some got released, some didn't. Did the long-range firing end up being the critical thing, or were most engagements within range that the carronade were effective? It honestly depended on the engagement. It was the long-range firing was often the critical thing between a frigate-on-frigate conflict. But if you got into a convoy battle where you were dealing with privateers especially, you would get to the short range. Well, the carronade would be critical. No, 640. Why would they make a fleet a law that the fleet can only land at Cadiz? Because that was the only place considered secure enough that the monarchy had control of, that they wouldn't lose half the money to various long fingers on the way. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of points out of lost prize money. I will be getting into these pictures in a second. I'm just making sure to catch up the questions because I let them go, Frank. See, they decided to declare it all droit to the crown, so they didn't have to pay the usual payout. Droit to the Admiralty, not the crown. It was all given to the Admiralty, so the Admiral's got the payout. So 160,000 went to the sterling. No, the 160,000 was split between the whole of the crews. 15k went to each of the captains. I know you gave the value of the cargo in Spanish dollars, but not in pounds sterling. It was £900,000, the whole thing, in pounds sterling at the time. Jurisdiction. I can now understand how frigate captains would want to avoid promotion. Yes, getting the ship at the line was a loss of income. Oh. Yes, Dan, you do have the new emojis. Just need to make sure you buy your estate in a rotten borough and you've got the perfect retirement plan. Yep. Yes, because the admirals, and you have to remember, one of those captains was acting as commodore, so he got probably got an extra 10,000. and the admiral would have in charge would have got 10,000, and then the rest would have been split between the various crews. The beef Wellington always looks raw. It's actually quite well cooked. Distinguish, at Trafalgar there were 2 or 3 sets of ships with nearly the same name, just different language. Yeah. Giovilla, Sarnia, Ontario was developed with the Royal Navy prize money investments. Channeled through Henry Jones, a fleet purser with many connections. Ah yes, the pursers always made the money. So, now we're on to the super heavies. And whenever I start talking about heavy frigates, everyone goes, "Ah, yes, these are the American ships. They're brilliant." And I go, "Yes, they are. But the Americans didn't get there first. May I introduce you to the Bellona class of the Swedish Navy?" Now, the thing is, these are called the super heavies because technically the 18-pounders were the heavy frigates. And the super heavies are ones with 24-pounders. And the first ship in the Bellona class is launched in about 1784. She's Bellona. And the Swedes wanted these frigates, rather similarly to why the Americans wanted their frigates, to be able, as they wanted frigates that could be able to stand in the battle line in emergency against some of the smaller ships of the line, but would also be able to support them in their operations in the various coastal waters and inshore waters of Sweden. In the 1790s, the French then build some 24-pounder frigates, such as Forte and Egyptian. They also decide to reduce some of the older ships of the line, including Diadem, to produce some super heavy frigates. But this is not the earliest example of razaying, because I will be getting into razaying. Razaying has been around a long time, and I'll be getting into that at some point. I think it's next slide. And the British, of course, respond by razaying some of their ships, including Indefatigable, and also building some 24-pounder armed frigates, such as HMS Endymion, which had an interesting battle with USS President. Which, of course, gets captured and becomes the Royal Navy's R&R Stone frigate in London. Still to this day, HMS President. So, the point I'm trying to make is when you start talking about the American super heavy frigates, you have to be careful about saying these are something special and new and different. They are something new. But they are new to the US Navy. They're big capital ships, but again, in Sweden, that's sort of what they are. The Royal Navy doesn't have as many as perhaps other navies would have because the Royal Navy has a lot of big capital ships. So that's the trouble. They fall into the level of they are supposedly, again, faster than anything that they can't outfight, or able to outrun anything they can't outfight, but able to outfight anything they can't outrun. And one of the interesting things is that when they do come across the smaller frigates, they do win, because that's what the Royal Navy has on the American station, because most of its bigger frigates are back to deal with the French and the Spanish, who are the bigger threat. Once the Royal Navy sends out the bigger frigates to support the operations in the War of 1812, the American crews find themselves facing A, the far more experienced Royal Navy crews, but also B, ships of the same quality, if not slightly better quality, because again, the Americans, this has been their first time building frigates. For the British, these are frigates number 100 and something or other, possibly number 200 and something or other. They're kind of experienced at it. They're turning out quite good ships by this point, you'd hope. They still have some interesting issues, but they're fine. They're good. Rapid Razor, how did the RN frigate stack up against the other cannonballs? Quite well. You know, they are, when you're talking about equivalent ships, they are quite good. So when you're talking about a 24-pounder ship versus a 24-pounder ship, they are capable. When you are talking about a 24-pounder versus an 18-pounder, it gets sort of different. And I have a good picture of HMS USS Constellation at some point. Let's see, United States. Yeah, the example often given is that when you have the broadside weight of HMS Macedonia, which fights USS United States, and Macedonia is an 18-pounder standard frigate, and the United States is, of course, a 24-pounder super heavy. So the Macedonia is a heavy frigate, a standard frigate for the Royal Navy. United States is a super heavy. The broadside weight on a Macedonia is 528 pounds. The broadside weight for the United States is 864 pounds. Now, actually, that sounds better than it actually is, because the reality is that and I'm going to make sure I have my calculator on my phone because I don't trust the figures I have in my notes. So I'm not being rude, I'm making sure I'm doing this again. And now it's 28 times 18 versus 30 times 24 for their long-range guns, which is a difference of 216 pounds in terms of their long-range guns. So you're talking in terms of their broadside weight. Once you get the carronades involved, that just goes higher. They have a 216-pound advantage in terms of broadside weight. Well, they have a 108-pound advantage, sorry, because it's only one side for broadside. 108-pound advantage in broadside weight at long range. At short range, they have I'm just checking my maths again. Sorry. Yeah. At short range, they have a disadvantage of 388 pounds. That's that's the thing. They have 108 pounds disadvantage at long range, but the moment they get to short range, it's 388 pounds. So you do not want to close if you are an 18-pounder frigate versus a 24-pounder frigate. They just have too much. They just have such a solid weight of fire. The fact is also the United States is about 1,600 tons burthen, whereas Macedonia is about 1,100 tons burthen, and carries a larger crew. So everything's on the side of the United States, and that's what happens. But the moment they start to, how to put it, equivalent ships come into battle, then it becomes a very different scenario. $15K for each of the captains. Melee 6040. Now, here is the first, and now we're getting into the Razes, and this is the point you should get into this. The amount of times I hear in various presentations and things, the Razes are a response to the War of 1812. Well, here is the point. The Royal Navy's Razes, they have 3 ships converted to Razes in 1794. Which, by my count, is 18 years prior to the War of 1812. So... And they're actually even before the American heavy frigates start to enter service in large numbers. So they're more a response to the French than anything else, who are also, cutting things down. And this does produce some of the finest frigates in the Royal Navy. It really does. A Razes is pretty much they take a ship of the line and they cut it down. So the 3 ships cut down in 1794 are taken from 64 gun to 44 gun ships. The 3 ships cut down in 1813 are taken from 74 gun to 58 gun ships. So those ones are a response, you can argue, to the War of 1812. Downstream, Razes is when you take the top deck off a 2-decker to make a light ship, but which is still bigger and nastier and able to carry more sail so fast than the frigate is heavier built. Yeah, also tends to be more stable. Trey McCartney, imagine how much more the Tribals would have gotten up to if the price system was still in place during World War II. If the price system had still been in place during World War II, I maintain that Cunningham would not have been able to order them to abandon the Polar and sink it. They would have taken that ship home. The heavy crew, if the price system had still been in place, there would have been various German destroyers brought back from Narvik. There would have been various heavy cruisers captured in the Mediterranean. And I'm not sure what HMS Newman would have got for capturing a whole island, but I'm fairly sure she'd have demanded something. Senator Canary, in 1812, did the RN ever think about sending third rates over? They did. Some of them did get sent over. But the trouble is, again, they send over the third rates, and once they get by the time they get there and they've redeployed them all, it takes a while in age of sail, and most of the fighting's really over. And the Americans, when they see a third rate coming, for some reason decide they don't want to tangle with it. It's sort of a case of, that's got 74 guns! Yeah, we're not going to be here, bye-bye! And when they are caught, it's a case of, ouch! I didn't realise he was there. Rapid Racerbacks. Age of Sail isn't my thing. How long have you been lining magazines with copper at this point? That starts fairly early on in the Age of Sail. The moment you get into gunpowder, you start having to work out how you're going to protect gunpowder from damp, and how you're going to protect it from not just damp, but also from sparks, and copper is lighted on quite quickly. Garrett Cron, isn't rate of fire significantly better with smaller guns? Not as significant as you'd think in Age of Sail terms. When you're talking about the whole motions of the cannon, yes, it is slightly better, but it's still a lot of people moving the stuff around. Once you're getting into the gun age where the guns are sort of built in the Ironclad age, once they're sort of built in and they're breech loading, then it really starts to set up the difference in the size of guns and the rate of fire. So once you get into to the age of steam steel, it's very difficult to capture a warship and bring it home. Only happened 2 or 3 times, and a few submarines. They're easy to scuttle. Yes, but they would try. Alfred B228. Hello. how much advantage was the live oak used in US super frigates, or was the advantage of live oak overhyped? Overhyped. It was useful, but against seasoned oak and the stuff that the British were using, got a marginal advantage, but it's not that massive. And as I said, when they get to start the fighting equivalent ships, then they start getting into trouble. They have easy victories, or very hard fought victories, against ships which are noticeably not the British best, the best of the British crews, and noticeably not the as equivalents to them in firepower and size. This is not to say they don't do well. This is their first major war against a really major power. They do well. They kick behind. But the thing is, the moment that the Royal Navy starts turning up with the decent stuff it has, the equivalent stuff to what the Americans have been putting in, or the rather superior stuff, because third rates turn up and, sorry, they haven't got anything that can match up with that, the American Navy ceases to be really much of a factor. So that's the thing. The American Navy is a big factor when it has an opponent it can actually contend with. The moment the Royal Navy starts turning up in the kind of force which it can't contend with, it ceases to be as big a factor. Kind of like what happens to the Swedish Navy. I was not aware of that. How disappointing were the British units of Manapan when they figured out they didn't have time to tow Polar back to Alexandria? Very disappointed, but mostly about bragging rights. As I said, if it had been prize money, they would have been gone for it. But is the issue the shift to closed ships rather than open tops to make boarding harder, rather than the means of propulsion or what they're built for? It's a bit of a bit of a combination of all. But also, there aren't really many major wars when they get into that. But the British, you know, if you can capture a ship, and if you want to, you'd capture it. Again, as steamwatch, but also it's easier to sink a steel warship than a wooden one. There is to an extent that they do tend to sink slightly faster. Wood, naturally buoyant, tends to help it stay up. So Razé are a battlecruiser philosophy of building something on lines of current battleship class with the same caliber but fewer guns, except by conversion. Again, it's the same as the frigates we've been talking about. Every time you get a heavy frigate, it's basically the same idea that comes through. Which is why I argue that you could have called battlecruisers frigates. Because a frigate is, theoretically, fast enough to outrun anything it can't outfight, able to outfight anything it can't outrun. Who'd want to buy a German destroyer at that point? Well, it's more a case of the Royal Navy needed as many escorts as it could for the convoy war, so they'd have made something of them. JPL, HMS Africa, a 64 in American waters in 1812. Yes. And HMS Africa doesn't, if I remember correctly, doesn't have that many problems in the War of 1812. But she was one of the bigger ships out there. Let's see. War of 1812. Yeah, she's part of Sir Philip Broke's squadron, but that fails to capture the USS Constitution. But basically, the USS Constitution looks at the squadron chasing it and goes, I'd rather be anywhere than here at this precise moment. That's not really a scenario I want to be in, and also, that ship's HMS Africa, she went solo into the Battle of Trafalgar. She's really not a good ship I want to take on. Because again, Constitution, a big, powerful frigate, but doesn't want to fight a ship of the line. But it demonstrates the whole thing. We can outsail, we can outpace anything we can't outfight. We can outfight anything we can't outrun. Shumi, now I see Rodney towing back the hulk of the Bismarck and asking how much is worth of scrap. And that honestly wouldn't surprise me, Rodney. Let's be honest, she is called Rodney. Jermic, also, placing Razay on the frigate ship line spectrum comparable to placing Dunkirk's on the BC to BB spectrum? It's certainly an interesting one. Danrim, I now have visions of a fight breaking on the Polish to try and the Iron ones wanting to get prize money. Let's be honest, if the Polish had been told about prize money and it had been viable, this is the Polish Navy. They would have gone for that. They would have helped capture the Bismarck, and then they would have claimed that instead of they get prize money, they get the Bismarck. JPL, when did frigates get their no fire and you not get shot at status during major ships line actions? Basically, smaller ships of line start to get that the moment you get into what I would call serious conflicts. So, and that only really applies to 5th rates and below. 4th rates always have a sort of problem in that they look close enough to and powerful enough compared to other ships that they're often get mistaken for ships of the line in a battle. So they would either have to hang back or expect to take part in it. 5th rates and below get it from about, I would say not long, around 1700 onwards. Colonel Mechanic, is that what lining the magazines of copper was for? Keeping the powder dry? Keeping it dry and also keeping it spark free. Remember, they have copper all around them to try and keep spark away from the powder. They don't want it to go up. It has no armouring capability. Let's be honest, copper is not armour. Now, this is HMS Namur, which was razzied in... Let's see, when was HMS Namur razzied? She was razzied in 1805 from a 90-gun ship, second-gun ship of the line, second-rate ship of the line, to a 74-gun third-rate ship of the line. Ends up taking part in the Battle of Cape Ortegal. So, she's launched in 1756, finally broken up in 1833, and is still fighting battles in 1805. Uh, 78-year career, 78, 79-year career, possibly 77-year career, sorry. I added on instead of taking off. Raparezo, with the resurgence of piracy, do you think we will see an armed merchant ships or PMC armed merchant ships? I've been talking about that for a while. You've certainly got some personnel going on these merchant ships who are providing security. She's already, as Dan Freeman said, follow Kate Jameson because she's involved in supplying the people who provide weapons onto the who provide security, not weapons, provide security on merchant ships. Senator Canary, a Polish crewed Bismarck is scary for both sides. It's scary for all sides. Dan Freeman, the Polo would be a gift to the Free French, as it would probably be a maintenance nightmare, and de Gaulle deserves the headache. Yep. Seamush, not always. A 72-gun third rate and can outsail a frigate in heavy weather. In heavy weather, perhaps, but in heavy weather, and that's if the frigates, in most conditions, the frigate can outsail. This is the thing. That's the idea of what they're built to be. And the thing is, in heavy weather, not many people are going to be fighting in really heavy weather. If you can keep your ship at far enough away in heavy weather, they'll probably lose you. Africa, same time as Agamemnon. And Nelson said it was very fast. Look, ships tend to be faster at the beginning of their commission. After a while, they get things built up. So at this point, most of the ships in the squadron had been commissioned for a while and hadn't been probably keel-hauled enough that, considering the war's time, the space they were in. That was the main problem the Royal Navy had with Caribbean postings. They didn't really feel they had the adequate infrastructure for supporting the things out there. They kept trying to build it. Constantinople. I read that powder monkeys did not wear shoes because the electrical charge might detonate the powder. Is that true? It's not so much that they don't wear shoes because of where they're going and the fact they're carrying powder. So it's not so much the electrical charge, but especially hobnail boots and those sort of things they had at those times were not what we call modern rubber soles. They're very different soles that so they would sometimes wear slippers, but very rarely iskanadab, mainly because who's going to pay for them to have felt slippers? That'd be something a captain would be paying for if they really wanted it. Otherwise, no. So it tended to be barefoot. Some captains were generous, so were some admirals. So, Nick, how often these ships get dry docked? How often they find a dry dock? Hello, Eric Kaufman. Powder monkeys tended to be boys, not in their early teens, Carl van Gasbo, but usually 7 or 8. Sometimes a little older, but sometimes a little younger. So the reason they can outsail them is because 1, greater mass and length versus the slowing effect of waves, which affect the frigate more. 2, the larger ship can take more sail for given wind. All true, but they can't outsail them. As you can talk about, you're talking about heavier weather and you're talking about rousers, and heavy frigates tend to have a full sail length. So again, we're talking about a heavy frigate, they would tend to have a very large area of sail canvas as well for their size. They would tend to be very capable. So it can outsmell the bigger frigates and the smaller ships of the line. It gets more interesting, and then you've got larger ships of the line which frankly aren't that maneuverable. So it's basically your argument is between the 3rd and the 4th rates. And it depends also on captains and their skill of sailing. A captain with a good sailing master and a well-trained crew can get far more out of any given amount of wind than a captain without those things. It's kind of up. I think the felt slippers were for men filling bags in the magazines. Oh, yes, they're for some of the ammunition gents in the magazines. That job, they could well get it, but the powder monkeys, nah. Now, here's the other thing when we're talking about rousing. Ships have been being cut down in size for a long time. I'm not quite sure about Sovereign of Seas, though. Because there is an argument with her cutting down would make her into a rousey. But even cut down, she has 100 guns. And they still call her a delicate frigate. So, I'm thinking that's the British doing the typical British thing of going, we're going to give it a name, which is going to conjure up one thing. And the reality is very different. Melanie 100 guns when cut down. What did she have before being cut down? Well, her guns wander between 104 and 90. And they go up and down, and she has lots of reworkings. Sovereign Seas gets reworked a lot, but one of the interesting things about her is that and this is a good example of how this can happen. So, during the First Anglo-Dutch War, the States General of the Netherlands determined the reward money for crews of fire ships that succeeded in destroying specific enemy vessels. Sovereign Seas was singled out for an extra prize of 3,000 guilders in case they should sink her. She is often referred to as the Golden Devil by the Dutch. And in 1651, she's armed with 106 guns. By 1650, by the Battle of the Kentish Knock, she's refitted and comes out with 100 guns, and then has 106 guns by the time she goes into battle. And she runs aground on Kentish Knock itself during the battle, and she becomes a position which is fought over. The Dutch and the English keep fighting for control of Sovereign of the Seas, and there's a debate of whether it's 4 or 6 times control changes hands. The English managed to get control of her, keep control of her though, and she remains considered one of the most powerful ships in the English fleet for another 60 years. She's rebuilt in Chatham in 1660 to 100 guns as a first-rate ship of the line. And you have to remember, this ship enters service in 1637. She's only leaves service in 1697 when she's burnt. And interesting enough, the bosun, who was on night watch, had left the candle burning unattended. He admitted his fault and was court-martialed on 27th of January 1696. He's publicly flogged and imprisoned at Marshalsea for the rest of his life. And this is, of course, where the tradition of HMS Royal Sovereign has come from as a name in the Royal Navy. And at the moment, the last one we've had was, of course, the Revenge class battleship, which was transferred to the Soviet Navy as the Archangelisk. So we're due for an HMS Royal Sovereign. Anyone fancies working out what she should be, please tell me. I'm wondering if a Type 83 would be Royal Sovereign. What do they do with the wood when they cut down a ship? They reuse it. Various projects. Calm Ghostman and others read copper shell sheath powder rooms. You bring down the smallest fire possible as light source to have something reflective wall and seemingly helps visibility too. Actually, you tend to have your light source is the other side of the room from your door, and it's a glass window, and the candle or light would be set up the other side of the window, so you wouldn't have the light from outside the powder room coming in. You wouldn't actually have a naked flame anywhere near the powder room. You keep it as far away, and it would actually be in its own little sort of glass cubicle, as far away from the powder as physically possible. They were not stupid when it came to explosives. My crate, hello. I assume considering she's an earlier ship, they also count some lighter guns as part of the rating that they wouldn't later. Well, she's, as said, she's rebuilt to quite easily to a 100-gun first-rate ship of the line under the 1660 system, so it becomes an interesting... It becomes an interesting sort of thing in terms of I'm just going back to the 1706 establishment because that's the closest one. And yeah, first rates 100-gun ships. Yeah, she's on the original. She fits the 100-gun ship rate for a first rate when she's reconstructed in 1660 without any trouble. So I think she has fairly big guns the whole way through. RP Jangula, ex-AKMS Turvis. The only drawback is whether you Poles can distinguish between Norwegian and German pleas for mercy. I should never have suggested that, but Reparator. Now, Dan, American ships, while armed, do have to take back to sea to foreign ships on occasion. Oh, Dan's going more Sovereign Seas, a US World War II battleship. Every time she gets refitted, she gets more guns. Yeah. What? Imprisoned for the rest of his life for leaving candle burning. She was technically the most important ship in the fleet. Hello, Raging Sushi. And Glorious End. Yes, it was to be burnt in harbour, but you have been basically ignored for that while, because the trouble is first rates are incredibly expensive, and you only really need them for flagships of your major fleets. You don't really want them for other things, because they're just too expensive to move around otherwise in crew. Razorback, was there ever a situation where a ship was being boarded from one side and counter-boarded from the other? So it's three ships were side by side within the middle of a ship building a battlefield. Yes, Nelson famously in the, I think it's the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, or boards one ship, and then when their ally turns up to try and assist them, he then uses that as a chance to fight the battle from that ship onto their ship, and so ends up taking two ships. As I see, modern Royal Sovereign, either SSBN or third Queen Elizabeth class. Well, third Queen Elizabeth class has got to be Ark Royal, but if there's a fourth Royal Sovereign, I'll do. I've seen some pretty interesting lighting pictures of powder magazines. Yeah, they tend to be very, very cautious. I think Charles, and this is off topic, has decided to be another George. I think he's decided to be King George the Seventh. It's why members of the royal family have so many names, so they can pick what they want to be known as when they become king or queen. I think the Dreadnought class have already been all named, so that's why I don't think the Royal Sovereign could be a Dreadnought class. Right then, so as we discussed, the Razes were not a response to the War of 1812 for the Royal Navy. There is also a debate as to whether or not the super heavy frigates were already spar deck frigates or not. There's a debate over this, but basically, the spar deck frigates are what the Royal Navy really brings in as a result. Technically, HMS Leander and HMS Newcastle. Now, a spar deck frigate has an enclosed waist, which gives a continuous line of guns from bow to stern at the level of the quarterdeck forecastle. And they're almost the exact match. It's many people think to the 44 gun ships of the Americans, but I would say they're a slightly superior one, as they are 50 gun ships. And I would say they're designed with various other options involved. Now, the thing is, they are ordered in 1813, laid down in 1813. Newcastle's launch completed in 1814. And she has 30 24-pounder guns and 24 42-pounder carronades and 4 more 24-pounder guns in the forecastle. So she's got 34 24-pounder guns. And she's got 24 42-pounder carronades on the spar deck. So she's got 2 decks of firepower, really. She's got carronades above her long guns the whole way. Now, she takes part in the chase of the USS Constitution, because along with Leander, this is Newcastle pictured, which was under command of Sir George Collier, they'd been watching the Constitution down in harbour at Boston. Collier interrupted his surveillance in order to take Leander to Halifax to resupply, and Acasta and Newcastle, and Acasta's another frigate, are left off the port. At this point, Constitution and 2 other heavy frigates leave Boston. Collier returns. Acasta is sent into Halifax for a refit because she really needs it, although Captain Kerr pleased to be allowed to join the chase. And so he does. And at this point, they go chasing south after the Americans. The Constitution manages to get sighted by the squadron. This is, remember, Leander, Newcastle, both 50-gun frigates, and Acasta, not a small vessel either. And these 3 had already shared the proceeds of capturing various other ships already. Acasta was a 18-pounder heavy frigate, so she's technically outgunned by any of the American heavy frigates, but with Newcastle and Leander with her, she's not in any trouble. They do actually catch up with the Constitution off Port-au-Prince in March 1815. She's proceeding with 2 prizes. She's captured the sloops Levant and Seine. However, Constitution managed to elude the British in the weather. And Newcastle managed to drive Levant ashore and a caster captures her there. And then they try and hunt down Constitution in the Caribbean, but she returns to port and voids engagement. That's what the Royal Navy builds the spar deck frigates for, in many ways. They basically go, right then, the Americans are using very big frigates, let's build a couple of really big frigates on our own. And this ship is a 50-gun 4-freight. That is the point. This is, again, the point I'm making. The line of frigate quite often extends up into the 4-freight, and often 4-freights are frigates, or considered frigates. And quite often it also goes down quite low. I know powder plus flame equals space zones, but was it really that volatile sensitive? It could be, and that's the point. It could be that sensitive, so they didn't take any risks. Daniel Politics 1. Hello. Powder, unlike modern high explosives, will burn or explode from any spark of flame. Decision. Spar deck frigates were more useful ships of the line. Being two very heavy-hitting decks of guns. Yes and no. They're useful, but they're still rather small guns. So you wouldn't. They're useful in certain weathers. They're more useful than the ships of the line. And that's the other advantage you have to remember. Ships of the line tends to hang slightly lower underwater compared to frigates. So again, when we're talking about heavy weather, yes, you can maybe overtake a heavy frigate if you're a well-manned third rate. But the difference between your broadsides might not be that great. And if they manage to position it, they could get a big ouch on you. See much. Spar is the word for spare masts, yard arms, etc. Sort of deck. Originally, yes. And originally, that's the reason for it's called the spar deck, because originally that was the point where the spare yard arms, the spare masts, all those things were stored at that level. And when you build a deck across, it's called the spar deck, because that's the point at which those are used. It's Franceville. Please, no one actually try what Tis Franceville has just suggested. There is a theory, and it's theoretically possible, but don't do it. Because you have to be very, very careful, and even the slightest flame touching it, or the slightest too much heat touching it, and you have boom on your hands. So, some notable frigate officers, as we've been talking about, and we talk about frigates in the Royal Navy, and I mean, going through giving design and history ideas of what some of the things I've done. Here are some 4 names that you really should know if you're talking about Royal Navy frigates, especially when we're discussing the history properly. You have Sir Edward Pellew, Sir George Ralph Collier, Sir William Sidney Smythe, and Sir Graham Moore. Now, Sir Graham Moore, of course, I've already mentioned because I've been talking about one of his more famous battles, the action of the 5th of October, 1804. Yeah. You don't think they're going to pick one of their less capable officers to go after the very nice prize available. They're not. They're going to pick a really good officer. And they did. Pellew is particularly... It's one of my favourite ones, I have to admit, of the period. He's also known as the first Viscount Exmouth. He fights in the American War of Independence, the French Revolutionary Wars, and Napoleonic Wars. He retires an admiral after having served as Commander-in-Chief East Indies, Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean Fleet, and Commander-in-Chief Plymouth. No, not sure if Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean Fleet, but I think CNC Med Fleet. Now, his father dies in 1764, and the family go to Penzance, and Pellew's educated at the Truro Grammar School, which is still there to this day, and you can go there. But he did not get on well with his headmaster, he was not happy at home, and he runs away at sea at the age of 14, but soon deserts because of the unfair treatment to another midshipman. Basically, he gets in a fight because he feels a colleague is being bullied. This doesn't really lose him that much, because in 1770 he joins the Royal Navy again, and it's aboard HMS Juno with a guy called Captain John Stott. He then follows Stott for several years, joining him on Alarm and various other frigates. But he ends up having an argument with Stott and is put ashore at Marseilles. And ends up getting a merchant ship to give him passage to Lisbon and on home. He then gets transferred to the Blonde, where it takes John Burgoyne to America in spring 1776 under the command of Captain Philemon Pownall, who is another dashing officer. They get a lot of detached service, they take part in battles, and Pellew gets promoted because of personal gallantry. And eventually he's appointed to command the Carleton, which is a smaller ship. And he's then promoted properly to lieutenant. Sort of in 1778 on the Princess Amelia, a guard ship at Portsmouth. The reason he's appointed to a guard ship, not a seagoing ship, is because Lord Sandwich considers him bound by the terms of the surrender at Saratoga, because he's been there when it was surrendered, so cannot undertake active service. But later in the year, he's appointed Lincoln, goes out to Newfoundland, and he spends a lot of time in frigates. This is the point about Ed Pellew. He spends a lot of time in frigates. He spends a lot of time in small ships, and he's very, very successful in them. His first proper frigate, which he gets command of, is a 32-gun HMS Winchelsea, which had been built in 1764 and was armed with 12-pounder guns and all sorts of... It's a Niger-class frigate. It's the standard frigates before the 18-pounders come along. He does all sorts of actions, and of course we'll go on to do the bombardment of Algiers. But most importantly with frigates, in 1795 he's put in charge, 1794 he's made Commodore of the Western Frigate Squadron. 1795 he's put in command of HMS Indefatigable, and the squadron comprises of Argo, Concorde, HMS Revolutionaire, I wonder where the Royal Navy picked her up, and HMS Amazon. He captured the French frigate Unity and then Virginie off the coast of Ireland. And he's noted for the action of January 1797 when the two frigates, that is, Indefatigable and Amazon, managed to take on and capture the Droit de l'Homme. Unfortunately, they don't get to keep her because she runs aground, and so does Amazon. But Indefatigable does manage to claw away off the lee shore. He has a good career. Then let's go on sort of the other ones. Sir Ralph Collier. Right. Now, here is the interesting thing about Collier. He is most famous for the Battle of the Fleche, when in September 1709 he is in charge of the 18-gun sloop HMS Victor. Now, he'd been escorting convoys and doing all those sort of things for a few years at this point, and he stops briefly at Diego Garcia and falls in with the 22-gun French corvette Fleche. The two ships fight a brief engagement on the 1st of September 1801, and the Fleche damages the Victor's rigging and manages to escape. Collier repairs the damage and then finds his opponent again on the 5th of September in sheltering in the Mahe roads. Despite it being a narrow channel and unfavourable wind, Collier manages to warp the Victor into the harbour, and with the aid of her staysails closes on the French ship, and after enduring raking fire for some time, managed to haul his ship around and exchange broadsides for over 2 hours. At which point the Fleche is observed to be in sinking condition and her captain runs her aground. A party of men are sent over from the Victor. Unfortunately, they find the French have set the ship on fire and abandon ship. The men evacuate and then they reboard and manage to extinguish the fire. Unfortunately, after they've managed to stop the fire burning, the Fleche slips off and reef into deeper water. His exploit, though, impresses Earl St. Vincent, and who is then at that point the first Sea Lord. So St. Vincent promotes him to post captain and gives him the 50-gun HMS Leopard as his command. A frigate. 50-gun HMS Leopard. Frigate. As a further mark of favour, St. Vincent antedated his commission to the 22nd of April 1802, giving him greater seniority over the officers promoted a week later in the general promotion that followed the Peace of Amiens. Unfortunately, in 1803, he has to come ashore because war's over. And he doesn't get another seagoing command till the 32-gun HMS Minerva in 1806. That's what happens. You can have political favour for a while, but if you don't have it long term, you aren't going to do much of it. Now, there's lots of questions coming through, so I'm going to answer them. Dan Freeman, Dr. Clark, make sure Drakenfell knows this. I try. Hello, old Richard. Seneca, the best ships are of no use without good crew and officers. Case in point, the French Navy under Napoleon. Janet, 4 names. Do we have a good fit for hypothetical Pellew-class frigates? I think they could do it. Ralph Collier probably the most disputed one because he does have an interesting end to his career. But the other 3, yeah. Well, the other 2 without any doubt. Pantrim, although a Moor class allows you to make jokes about the more of them, so much. Actually, the spar deck is only partially covered, with portions of it around the boats and spars being empty air going down into the upper gun deck, but only over the waist of the ship. Again, depends on the actual ship. Sometimes you're quite correct. In some of the ships we're talking about, especially some of the Royal Navy spar deck frigates, they have a lot more cover than they don't. And the stuff they don't have covered has a thick rope net over it, sort of thing. Graham Hunt, didn't he have a brother the French caught at one point? Yes, they did. They caught Israel Pellew at one point, and the French did think, oh my lord, there's two of them. Rapper went, were there any tribal captains descended from sail frigate captains? There were certainly quite a number of them who were long-term naval families, so probably yes. See much. Lol, I'm surprised they kept the name Revolutionaire. They were not fans of Revolution for obvious reasons. No, they weren't, but they were quite happy to use this as names at one point. I'll be back in a second. Someone's just come to the door. So, now here's an interesting thing which I thought I'd add into this question: the post ship. Now, post ships are a rather interesting point of contention for the Royal Navy. They really are, because a post ship is sort of a sixth-rate vessel, and by virtue of being a rated ship, i.e. having at least 20 guns, they require a post captain, that is someone who's actually got the rank of captain, rather than a lieutenant or commander to be their captain. Because you can be a captain of a ship but not be a captain. You can be a lieutenant or a commander. Now, but in practice, for the Royal Navy, nothing smaller than 28 guns was a frigate. So if it's below 28 guns, it's not a frigate in the Royal Navy, but it's above 20 guns, it has to have a full captain in as its captain. This situation changes after 1817, but these ships are therefore tend to be described by the officers who serve them as post ships, though, rather than frigates. The other thing that's interesting to note is about these vessels, they tend to be the smaller ships which are produced ship rigged, i.e. with a square rigging on 3 masts. The US Navy's term for these ships was third-class frigates. So it was a third-class frigate. They had first class, second class, and third class. So these ships are kind of interesting. The ships, though, are also, and this is the important part, are frigate built. This means they have the traditional quarterdecks and forecastles, which are, of course, considered critical characteristics for a post ship, and which distinguish them from the 20-gun ship sloops, which lack those things, but still require a post captain because they have 20 guns. No. And but they don't have an all-up platform amidship, so they're not true frigates. Because again, because of virtual design, they have a high center of gravity, which makes them rather unliked by the Royal Navy, but they are considered seaworthy. And in peacetime, the RN tends to use them as substitutes for frigates in distant stations. But in wartime, they tend to mostly get used as convoy escorts. In simple terms, these are sloops. But they're not sloops, because there are other ships which are called sloops. Fun times. These people are making me want to go, what did I do in my life? Don't look up some of them then. If you really want to be depressed, have a look at what Sir William Sidney Smith gets up to. I didn't get onto him because, frankly, I don't want to upset you all, but I will do. Now let's see. He would be at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent in 1780, the Battle of Chesapeake in 1781, Battle of Saints in 1782. He fights in the Russo-Swedish War and the Battle of Viborg Bay in 1790 and the Battle of Sölvesborg in 1790, and is also involved in the Siege of Acre. Retires from the Royal Navy as a full admiral. He joins the Royal Navy in 1777, and he sees action aboard the Raleigh, well, against the Raleigh in 1778. The US frigate, USS Raleigh. What's interesting is she's captured and then serves in the Royal Navy as HMS Raleigh. So the US Navy supplies HMS Raleigh. We'll give that one to one side. For bravery in his action under Rodney in Cape St. Vincent in 1780, he's appointed a lieutenant on the third-rate ship Alcide, despite being only, let's see, in 1780, when he's promoted in January, he's born in June 1764, so he's not yet 16 years old in January 1780. You're supposed to be at least 19 to be made a lieutenant. And he is made a lieutenant at the age of 15 years old. So Sidney Smith becomes a lieutenant on a third-rate ship of the line at 15 and 5 months short of his 16th birthday. And then he distinguishes himself under Admiral Thomas Graves at the Battle of Chesapeake, and again under George Rodney at the Battle of Saints. And as a consequence, is given his first command, Fury. This is the actual sloop Fury in 1781. So he is 16 years old when he's given command of a ship. It's a sloop. And he's promoted to captain of a larger frigate. But peace is declared in 1783, so he's put ashore and on half pay. So in 83, that would be roughly 19 years old. When he's supposed to be making lieutenant, he is put ashore as a captain on half pay, a full captain. While he's at peace, he's a 19-year-old on half pay. You know, he does what any 19-year-old on half naval captain's pay would do. He travels to France and becomes involved with intelligence matters, observing the construction of the new naval port at Cherbourg, and he then also travels extensively in Spain and Morocco, looking at potential enemies. In 1790, he applies for permission to serve the Royal Swedish Navy in the war between Sweden and Russia, and Gustav III appoints him to command a light squadron and to be his principal naval advisor. Smith leads forces clearing the Bay of Vibog of the Russian fleet, known as the Battle of Svensund, i.e. he commands the battle. And at this point, the Russians lose 64 ships and over 1,000 men in that battle. The Swedes lose 4 ships. And for this, Smith is knighted by the king, that's King Gustav III, and made a Commander Grand Cross of the Swedish Svadsorden, or the Order of the Sword. He was allowed, with King George III's permission, to use this title. In 1792, his younger brother John is appointed to the British Embassy to the Ottoman court in Constantinople, and Smith obtains permission to travel to Turkey. While there, war breaks out with revolutionary France in 1793, so Smith recruits some British seamen and sails to join the British fleet under Admiral Lord Hood, which had occupied the French Navy's port of Toulon. I.e., he finds a ship, he gets control of the ship, and he brings some British seamen who happen to be in various Turkish ports together and forms his own crew. By the time he arrives in December 1793, the revolutionary forces have surrounded the port and are attacking it. The British and the Allies have insufficient forces to mount an effective defence, and Smith, as he's technically serving as a volunteer with no command, is given the task of burning as many French ships and stores as possible before the harbour can be captured. Lack of support from the Spanish forces left more than half the French ships to be captured or undamaged, although Smith destroyed more French ships than the most successful fleet action to that date. Unfortunately for him, because he fails to destroy them all, Nelson, Collingwood and various other officers actually blame him for this failure to destroy all the French fleet. They actually hold it against him. Smith is therefore, when he returns, is not given a fleet command. He's given command of the 5th rate HMS Diamond and joins the Western Squadron under Sir John Bolles Warren. This squadron includes Sir Edward Pellew and various other officers. And basically they've been selected because they're daring and brave. Smith, on one occasion, takes his ship almost inside the port of Brest to observe the French fleet. In fact, the French guns and cannon and artillery forts presume he must be a French ship coming in, because no British ship would be so stupid as to get so close. In 1795, he's acting commodore in charge of the ships of the Western Squadron, occupies the Îles Saint-Marcouf. He decides to, basically he takes part of France. He sacrifices 2 of his vessels, Badger and Sandfly, to provide materials and manpower for fortifying the islands, and sets up a temporary naval garrison there. The Royal Engineers, Royal Marines and Royal Artillery detachments are soon established, and the islands serve as a forward base for the blockade of Le Havre. His career carries on like this, but let's put it this way. In 1796, he and his secretary, John Wesley Wright, are captured whilst attempting to cut a French ship out of Le Havre. Smith had taken the ship's boats into harbour, but the wind died as they attempted to leave harbour, and the French were able to recapture the ship with Smith and Wright aboard. Instead of being exchanged, they planned on actually charging Smith with arson for his burning of the French fleet at Toulon. As Smith had been on half pay at the time, the French considered what he'd done was not an official combatant. However, whilst in prison, he actually does use the chance of getting hold of a decent French artist, in his words, Philippe Augustin Hennequin, to commission a drawing of himself and his secretary, so that preserves for posterity. Eventually, in 1798, after many attempts, the Royalists helped Smith and Wright escape, and they're taken to Le Havre, where they board an open fishing boat and are picked up by HMS Argo on the 5th of May, 1798. The British, even though they've done this unofficially, then release Captain Jacques Béreguet, the guy who'd been captured from the French frigate Virginie by Indefatigable, as a prisoner exchange, so the French can't complain too loudly. And this is what I want to point out. In May 1798, he is 34 years old. Well, he's not yet 34 years old. He's 33 years old. He's done all that, and he's still younger than I am now. So those of you who are feeling that, you haven't done much in life, or don't worry, you're not the only one. I'm feeling currently, whenever I look at Sidney Smith, I'm sort of going, And someone's also brought Prince Philip into this. No. Don't. You're just going to crush us all. Thanks for I sent you some projects on Discord. Yes, you have, and I'll be looking at them. Hello. What happens if you capture a prize but you find the war was already over? Does the Admiral Court rescind it? It becomes an interesting debate, because if neither of you knew the war was over and you didn't know the war was over, you were still acting under orders of the war, so technically the prize is still valid, as long as you can prove you didn't know the war was over. And the prize court would decide these things. Distinguished. Not a technical distinction, only a rating, having to do with rank. Smaller ships could be declared post-rated when needed. That was rare, Steve. Rare. Post ships, as I was saying, they are the ships which... They're usually ones which are frigate-shaped hulls, but they're between 20 and 26 guns. Because the moment they're 28 guns, they're a frigate. The moment they're... But if they're not... If they are in between, they're called by tradition, by British tradition, but not by the Admiralty, as post ships. Because they're over 20 guns, so they require a captain to command. A full captain, rather than a commander or lieutenant commander. And it changes with the period, so it changes after 1817. Steve, you're perfectly correct after 1817. But pre-1817, you've got a different set of rules. Just for fun. As I understand it from the books I've read. Paul Johnson, poor old Collier, just read what happened to him. Let's go on. I thought there were ship-rigged sloops. There are all sorts of weird things. That's what any 19-year-old would do. Goes to France to be a spy. Me. This guy needs a movie. Seriously, he does. So Sidney Smith does need a movie. No, actually, no. So Sidney Smith doesn't need a movie. He needs a whole television series. You couldn't do him in a movie. It would have to be an entire, almost like Game of Thrones, The Crown. It would be about 4 or 5 seasons long. Possibly 6 or 7. Actually, I could probably divide it into 10 seasons if you wanted it. Okay. Then at what point does all this start changing? Before or after becoming an admiral? Before. Remember, he commanded his first battle, let's be honest, in serving as Royal Switch when he was 1790, so let's see, that's 6. He's 26 years old when he's commanding a fleet in battle. He's basically he's commanding a light squadron. So yeah. Decision. The fact he could actually get a crew of hardened seamen to follow him is probably the most impressive part. Yeah. Decision. This is like Julius Caesar feeling inadequate because he was 30 comparing himself to Alexander the Great. Yeah. Many secret. Prove you did not know the war was over. How did you prove negative? Just show your correspondence and prove you hadn't been told. If you haven't met your ship's log, etc., has not detailed you meeting any other ship, and you can prove you've been at sea and haven't heard the war's over, you've proved the war's over. Seamush, agreed. He and Cochrane could both have massive TV series. It would be so much fun. The Cochrane, seriously, the Sidney Smith TV series would be just guys going, and I went here. You would get people writing in going, you are abusing history. This is so much made up fiction. And you'd have to have historians basically writing about going, no, he actually did this. Yes, he actually did that. Yes, he did actually do that. Yes, he did try and catch. It was an inspiration for a scene in one of the Carry On movies about the I think it's Carry On Sailing or something, where they are a very small group of people try to cut out a whole ship. Yes, he did all sorts of weird things. In fact, there's a pretty frigate north of me in Hartlepool, the Trimcommely. Yes, the Trimcommely, I've been talking about earlier. She's a Lader class. Same as Unicorn, which I showed earlier. Supercharged 350, so we have all wasted our lives. We live in different times. We can't do the same as they used to. But it's a good time. He is an interesting officer. Honestly, between him and Pellew, the Royal Navy was basically going, all right then, you want to fight us? We will just unleash these two. How does he end up? He reaches Rear Admiral in 1805, and he's sent to the Mediterranean under Collingwood, who is Commander-in-Chief following Nelson's death. Collingwood sends him to assist King Ferdinand I of the Two Sicilies. So now he's the far more interesting age of 41 in 1805. And he is he basically plans a campaign using the Calabrian irregular troops with a force of 5,000 British men to march north of Naples. In 1806, he uses this force and basically is in charge of it, to win the Battle of Maida, which is a land battle. Unfortunately, he manages to annoy his superiors again, and he's replaced by Sir John Moore, who was, despite being considered one of Britain's most able soldiers, abandoned Smith's plan and resorts to making the island of Sicily a naval base in the Mediterranean rather than trying and recapturing the whole of the Kingdom of Naples. In 1807, he is appointed to command an expedition to Lisbon, either to assist the Portuguese in resisting the attack on them by Spain and France, or to destroy the Portuguese fleet and blockade the harbour at Lisbon should that be unsuccessful. He managed to arrange for the Portuguese fleet to sail for Rio de Janeiro and go to Brazil. And then he takes part in attacking colonies, planning attacks on colonies in South America using the Portuguese fleet, which is contrary to his orders. But so he's recalled to Britain in 1809 before he could carry them out. But the Portuguese then do carry him out. He's treated as a hero by the public, but the government continue to be suspicious of him because he continues to act without orders and go and do things on his own decisions. But he's promoted to Vice Admiral in 1810. And in 1810, he gets married to Caroline Rumbold, the widow of diplomat Sir George Rumbold, with whom Smith had worked previously and who he had a lot of affection for, both of them. Rumbold, of course, died. He marries Caroline. So admirals deciding to have relationships with diplomats' wives is, again, quite a normal thing going on. Although this was after George had died, so, slightly more acceptable than what Nelson got up to. He then escorts the royal family of Portugal to Brazil, and he's awarded by the Prince Regent John the Grand Cross of the Order of the Tower and Sword. So he picks up nice orders, I think. He gets, as his flagship, in 1812, he is given the ship, the 74-gun Tremendous, and is made second in command to Vice Admiral Edward Pellew to blockade Toulon. At which point he then decides to transfer his command to the larger HMS Hibernia, the 110-gun first rate. The French decided not to come out to confront the British. For some reason they decided there's Pellew, there's Smythe out there. We would rather be anywhere but out there. In fact, we'll stay in here. And then after that, there's peace. In theory. And here is the thing which should really interest people in Smith, because after the peace breaks out, he takes up the anti-slavery course. And he attends the Congress of Vienna to campaign for funds and military action to end the practice of slave-taking. He's talking about the Barbary pilots as well as various African slavery. He really doesn't like slavery. Unfortunately for him, he ends up rather poor, as the British government are slow to reimburse him for his debts in diplomatic exploits for them. And Smith ends up moving his family to Paris to avoid debtor imprisonment. Government does reimburse him eventually, and he managed to live in some style until he never gets a command again, and he dies in 1840 following a stroke. He's actually buried with his wife in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. And in 1801, and this is for anyone who's a New Yorker, Sydney is named for Sir Sidney's honour. He's also served as a member of the Fellow Royal Society. He had a good life. And there is a statue of him in the National Maritime Museum, which was actually paid for by a vote of the House of Commons. That's nice of them, eventually. But no, if you're ever in Paris, and this is another reason for me to actually dig out my my passport from wherever it's hiding in the house, you can go see his grave, which is shared with his wife in Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. I think this is going to sound strange. I think the French probably wanted him buried there because then they were sure that he was actually buried and wasn't going to come back at them again. Which sounds rather cruel, but it does seem to be the French seem to be very worried about him and Pellew. But Alex, the world is full of stupid people. People who care enough about history to write such a thing would probably Google him and realise it's real. Otherwise, they wouldn't care enough to write. We can hope. Concentrate on this. If Cochrane got a TV show, people would call it derivative because he inspired too many writers. Probably. Well, I've conquered half the world, established my own colonies, made the Polish Empire a nuclear power, and First Nation in space. All in Civilization 4. That's good, Albert. And did the Navy attract crazy people with poor resistance skills, or was that just the expected behaviour at the time? A mixture of the two. We have Robert Calder is coming out this week. The reason Robert Calder hasn't come out yet is I had computer issues all of Tuesday and didn't manage to record it. But it will come out this week, either tomorrow or Saturday. And I think you will enjoy it because I go into a lot of the various issues which Calder gets involved in. And he's another character of the period. I'm not as keen on him as I am these characters. I have to admit, I prefer the frigate captains to Calder. Malaga. Smith reminds me of Audie Murphy, a US World War II veteran who ended up playing himself in a movie where they had to downplay his actions in order to make the movie seem realistic. Yeah? I imagine for every Cochrane Swift there were 100 young men who died and tried to be bold and got killed instead. Not quite 100, but there was a fair number. Because where's Bijon when you need him? He's from New York. Yeah. Dan Freeman. The French repel Cochrane. And what to do with them after they died? Bear at sea? No, we have just found this nice place in the mountains. It might be deep enough. No, they kept him ashore and put a very great big stone on him. I actually have a picture of his grave. So if you are ever in that particular cemetery, you can know what to look for. I'll put it up. There you go. This is his tombstone for him and his wife in the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. So if ever you're in Paris and you feel like doing a bit of a naval history tour, there is quite a few very senior naval officers from both Britain, the Royal Navy and the French Navy buried there, I think, from memory. And certainly Sydney is there, and you can go and see his tombstone, you can go and see where he's buried. And I'll just get my translation. The translation of the text on his tomb reads, "Peace to the hero who arose, indomitable, when the streets of St. Jean d'Acre were flooded with Ottoman blood, in warlike France where the great Napoleon took off, the man who put a break on his conquests finds rest. England esteeming her triumphs her own, he built his monument on stone. This tomb, which marks the place where he is buried, was erected by friends with whom he lived until his death, as a testament to their admiration. Here lies the valiant heart of England's son, Sidney Smith. I'm sure it probably reads far nicer in the French, but Paix aux roses qui se dressa indomitable, quand les ruses de Saint-Jean d'Acre s'indorent des sangs ottomans, dans la France, guerre où les grands Napoléons prit essor. Le homme qui mit un frein à ses conquêtes trouve le repos. L'Angleterre estimant ses triomphes comme signes, lui est édifié en pierre monumentale. Cette tombe qui marque la palisse, où il est inhume, est-elle élevée par des amis avec les secours il vécut jusqu'à sa mort, et témoin de l'admiration seguit la ville cœur de fils de l'Angleterre, Sidney Smith. And I would like to apologise to everyone who is French at this point, because, in my defence, basically I got to the age of 13 and they discovered I was dyslexic, and they said, okay, if you're this bad in English, you can no longer do foreign languages. So I couldn't. I gave up French and German, and wasn't even allowed to pursue Latin about 20 plus years ago. So I didn't even get to the GCSE level, which most people in this country do. It was key stage 3 and I was out. So apologies for that. Hang on. I wonder if I can...
S'inondèrent de sang ottoman. Dans la France guerrière où le grand Napoléon prit essor. L'homme qui mit un frein à ses conquêtes trouve le repos. L'Angleterre, estimant ses triomphes comme siens, lui a édifié sa pierre monumentale. Ce tombeau, qui marque la place où il est inhumé, a été élevé par des amis, avec lesquels il vécut jusqu'à sa mort. En témoignage de leur admiration s'agit le vaillant cœur du fils de l'Angleterre, Sidney Smith.
I'm hoping that was better. Oh, thank you, Stafford Thompson. I hope you enjoy it when you watch it back. Graham Hollander. Geez, they did not half make sure they put a big stone in just to make sure. Yes, they did. If you notice, that's several layers of big stone. They're saying friends here. I'm wondering if it's more people who were scared he might come back. Oh. And Fab scandalised my mother by going to see that graveyard and only really seeing Jim Morrison's grave. She kept chucking names at me and looking more and more scandalised. Seneca Nero, Google voice is even worse than you. Okay, well, I tried. Alright then, what have we got coming up? Because, in the nicest way, it is nearly 10 o'clock and I want to get to bed at some point this evening. Sometimes, more than forgiven. From another angle, I also didn't not have to take French past the 8th grade, as there wasn't a point in frustrating the teachers that much. Speaking of which, a good example of how history gets forgotten and distorted over centuries is Napoleon. He was a very nasty piece of work, to say the least. Now most view him as neutral or positive. He was also taller than most people think. The entire Napoleon complex is based on on Punch cartoons. Frank Spanner, how did you first find out about these people, Dr. C? That's a weird question in many ways for me to answer, because Honestly, they've been a fact of my life for a long time. My family has a very, very heavy naval heritage on all sides. So we got taught naval stories when we were younger, and my granddad's average when you asked him to tell you a story, he would tell you a story of Age of Sail or World War Two of Age of Sail frigates or World War Two destroyers, and it was usually a it was usually a true story, and usually a distant relative. In some aspects, he also liked to tell stories about the Fleet Air Arm and various other things. My dad was obsessed with naval history. Was a naval architect. My mum worked for Lloyd's Register, and she loved loves her naval history. And so, yeah, I would suppose the first book I got, which really massively went into detail on all of them and gave me all of them, was Nicholas Rogers' Command of the Oceans, which is somewhere around me. I've got his Safeguard of the Seas there. Ah, there it is. Command of the Oceans. And honestly, this is the big book that has everything in it. But Frigate Captains, honestly, there isn't a really good book going through them all. And it's something which I have got in my mind to do at some point. Because whilst I might not be an Age of Sail specialist, I would like to do a book, and I've got about 20 odd names of of what I call small ship commanders, frigates, destroyers as they come in, and those sort of things, from about 1750 to about 1950, who I would like to write up about. Might add Michael Clapp and his command of his Minesweeper in there, because frankly it's cool. I'm going to pack this ship with as many machine guns as I can, and then we're just going to stand on here while we're being flown over by people. It's 5 a.m. here. It's nearly 10 here. Kuala Lumpur. Oh, cool. My dad did some work out there. He loved it. And he's always told us we had to visit. But Nelson was short, as was Admiral Tom Thumb Phillips. Yeah, there are some people who really were short. Nelson and Napoleon wasn't. Napoleon isn't easy to say he's good or bad. He was a person of lots of nuance. He was a person of his time. He certainly wasn't a nice person, but I'm not really sure I'd call him an evil person either. He is very much out for power, and that's a product of the time they are. But as Steve Winner's, people who have no regard for human life are not good rulers. It's the value they place on human life which matters, not necessarily whether they regard it or not. And I've got a small book called Frigates. Cool. Has lots of stories in it. That's good. Britain does do propaganda quite well. Right, take care, everyone. As you can see, it's got to the last slide, and what you possibly do not realise is I use this slide as my indicator for it's time to end on these videos. It's a case of you've got to the end, you've got through all your notes, which I have. That's your reminder that you do actually have to finish at some point. You can't go on all night as much as you'd love to. Seneca, do small ships attract risk-loving people? Small ships do tend to attract people who are, let's put it this way, do not understand the whole process of, oh, we have to write a risk assessment. Really? Why? In fact, I don't think any small ship commander ever does write a risk assessment. I think it would probably get in the way of them doing stuff. What if he never lived? Millions in that time would have never lived natural lives. Do you believe that, or would someone else have risen up in his place? This is the point. Napoleon is one person who can achieve that. There are several others who, if circumstances had been different, would have achieved what Napoleon did. So that's the point. Napoleon is a product of the time he's in. The things behind the revolution and what brings Napoleon to power are far more complex than just Napoleon. If Napoleon hadn't been there, someone else would have been in that slot, and they could have been worse. They could have been better. We do not know. That's the joy. That's the point of history. You don't know, but you can't presume because one person wasn't there, it necessarily wouldn't have happened. Because Napoleon doesn't cause Napoleon to rise. The revolution causes Napoleon to rise. It causes several other people to rise as well. The thing is, if you take out Napoleon, A, there's going to be someone else filling his slot, but B, that's opportunity for other people. As you get older, you become more conscious of your own mortality. Smaller ships may get CEOs who are younger, but those ships are somewhat more expendable than a battleship or ship of the line. Theoretically. Now, introductions. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who has liked the videos. Thank you to everyone who shared the videos. Thank you to everyone who subscribed. Thank you to everyone who's a patron and suggested topics and voted on topics like this. Thank you to everyone who's joined the channel for emojis and other stuff I'm going to add in at some point. I think I'm going to add in some more slides and pictures. And take care, Seneca. Thank you. Thank you. Graham Hanna. Stay safe and see you Sunday with big guns. That should be fun. It's about time I finally actually got around to actually doing that. I keep promising it and then other things keep coming up instead. And small ship commander. Stepping stone to big ship command or equivalent to today's special forces type. A mixture of the two. A mixture of the two, definitely. Seamish, all those atrocities in Spain were done directly at the order of Bonaparte. I don't disagree. But my point is, would someone else in command have ordered the exact same thing? This is the point I'm making. I'm not saying he's a good person. I'm not saying, that he doesn't just his things are always justifiable. By any stretch of imagination, they're not. I'm just saying that him being in command would have someone else would have been in charge instead of him, who might have made exactly the same decisions. We don't know. That's the point. I don't think Napoleon being removed at birth changes it. It's like, I also disagree with the idea that Hitler being removed necessarily changes World War II. Because I have a feeling Germany is ripe at that time for someone dictatorial to try and take charge. They're going through so many changes, they're dealing with such a psychological trauma from World War One and various other things, that someone is going to take over. The debate is whether it's from left or right, and the debate is who it is. And it might not even been. There was a good chance. There's a good chance it was going to be Göring rather than Hitler at several points. So this is the point I'm making about Napoleon. He is powerful, yes, and he makes all these decisions. He has all this effect on life. But I think if he hadn't been in charge, someone else would have been. And they could have been just as bad. They could have been better. They could have been worse. We don't know. Senator, yeah, I said that. Take care of the server. Graham Handler, history is always far more complex, yes. And this is risk assessment. Our assessment shows many risks in the action we're about to initiate. Fire as you bear. Yeah. Seamish, unlike anyone else would try to conquer all of Europe, like every other French leader since time immortal at that point. Let's be honest, that conquering all of Europe has been the desire of every French leader since that point, because they tend to disagree. And also, the reason he's fighting all of Europe is because all of Europe doesn't like them, because there's been a revolution which has got rid of the royal family. So, yeah. Probably is going to end up trying to conquer it, because he's going to be whoever is in charge is going to be fighting all of Europe. And there are actually better generals than Napoleon who could have got charge. This is the point. Napoleon was not always was not the strategic mastermind people like to make out of him. He basically has 3 good moves, and he uses them shamelessly. But it's only got 3 good moves. We could have had a far stronger, far more dangerous general in charge of France, and that could have been far more problematic. The odds are it would have been a general. Gosh, I'm not really the biggest fan of counterfactual history myself. No. Goering was actually more charismatic than we tend to think. We tend to forget how successful, how charismatic he was actually. And this does make me feel ill saying this sometimes. But he actually was quite successful. He was very popular in Germany. And there's a reason why Hitler can never get rid of him. Because he is charismatic and he is popular. As weird and as nutty as he is. Tinong, what made the Constitution so strong and shotproof? Luck. Never doubt it. Serious, but none of them except Charlemagne were nearly competent enough. Agreed, but they'd been trying it. Again, so this is my point, is it doesn't matter who did Napoleon's role, they're going to try it. 1961, what were Napoleon's 3 good moves? Heavy artillery, advance in the centre, feint from the flanks, and just keep moving. Ryan, take care, everyone. We will get into this another time, Steve. But, right then. Take care, everyone. Thank you, and take care. Have a nice evening. Hope you enjoyed watching it, and hope you've enjoyed the videos. Take care. Take care, Matthias Slavic. And thank you again, everyone, for watching. Thank you to everyone who's been adminning the chat as well this evening. Thank you, Melanie6040, Tian Wong, Constantine, Steve Windish. Thank you for all your questions. And thank you, Frank Sparrow, Graham Highlander, Calvin Gasberg. Thank you, everyone, basically. Have a nice evening. Thank you.